Chapter 1081. Hundreds of hands fell on the iron arrow. Some of the hands were covered in rotten boils, some of the hands were as thin as firewood, and most of the hands were only left with bones. The color of the bones was also very gloomy, not white, but rather gray. The iron arrow was finally stopped by hundreds of broken hands. But the power of the God-stunning array still fell on Long Qing through the hundreds of hands. He took people's divine sense and souls and used the hands of hundreds of dead people. Naturally, he had to bear all the power from those hands, whether it was victory or hostility. The power of the iron arrow was like a flood. Because of the final pause, it was released in an instant without any leakage. Long Qing retreated quickly on the city wall. His feet were like plows, cutting countless bricks on the city wall and leaving 2 deep ravines. The city wall of Qingjing City was 7 miles long. He retreated 7 miles, leaving a ravine of 7 miles on the city wall. Finally, he couldn't stand still. He broke through the arrow mound on the city wall and fell down heavily in the flying bricks and stones. With a swish, the last remaining power flew away with the iron arrow. No one knew where it went. The papal cavalrymen of the Westhill Divine Palace near the city wall heard the strange sound and hurried to help. It took them a lot of effort to pull Long Qing out of the stones and wood on the ground. Long Qing's face was pale like a dead man. He was about to say something, but then he covered his mouth and coughed painfully. In the eyes of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall, he was like a god. They had never seen him like this. The people under the city wall suddenly fell into a dead silence. After a while, Long Qing finally calmed down a little. He looked at the sky where the iron arrow had disappeared and was deep in thought. There was no fear in his eyes at all. Suddenly, the wind and snow all over the sky stopped, as if Haotian was showing a miracle. At the last moment, the lightning in the clouds became extremely dense, like the reflection of a dying patient, which made people on the ground feel awe. Only Long Qing could see the cotton-padded jacket appeared again, covered with dust, above the clouds. Then there was a green robe fluttering in the distance, reflecting the beautiful sunlight, like an immortal. The 2 figures disappeared quickly. The next moment, the drunkard appeared. He looked at the direction where the 2 disappeared and turned to Long Qing with a complicated look, as if he wanted to do something. Long Qing remained calm and slightly bowed to the drunkard. The drunkard was silent for a while and then disappeared without doing anything. Until then, Long Qing was completely relaxed and his face became pale again. The strange phenomenon in the north of Yan Kingdom today was the aftermath of the chase of the 3 powerhouses of the limitless state. The Abbey Dean, the eldest brother, and the drunkard, especially the first 2, were too close to each other. They formed turbulence in the interlayer of the qi of heaven and earth, which the lightning and of the wind and snow came from. What happened today would be repeated in the human world in the future. It would evolve into many fairy tales and frighten many ordinary people. Long Qing knew that the chase would not stop until one of the 3 found her first, and the disorder of the qi of heaven and earth would stop. For the 3, it was the most important and decisive thing. It would not matter even if the human world became a sea of fire. That was why the drunkard wanted to kill him, but he did not do it. Facing the drunkard's killing intent, Long Qing was very calm. Only in this way could he avoid a head-on fight with the drunkard. He did not think that he could defeat the real legend in the cultivation world. But his calmness also came from his confidence. He knew that his master would be the final winner in this shocking limitless pursuit. The drunkard started late, and the eldest brother could not ignore the joys and sorrows of the human world like the Abbey Dean and the drunkard. As long as he cared about the human world, he could not really leave. In this limitless pursuit, only a few people knew about it, but it would change the whole history. Just as Long Qing predicted, the eldest brother was at a disadvantage from the beginning. Maybe it was for this reason that he showed up in Qingjing City and hit Long Qing. He wanted to see if he could make the Abbey Dean stop for a moment, and he also wanted to do something to solve some problems for the academy and his younger brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, just like what he sensed in Linкong City and the capital of the Kingdom of Song, Long Qing was very powerful now. It would be hard to kill him if he did not concentrate. This assassination against Long Qing was not the result of the Academy's plan. It was a spontaneous decision. Ning Kei's arrow was shot because he sensed the anomaly in the east. At that time, his spirit and boldness had been used up in the first 2 arrows. Naturally, it was difficult to kill him. But he still shot. He wanted to see how powerful Long Qing was now, because he did not want to miss such an opportunity. Long Qing was definitely the one who knew Ning Kei best in this world. Although Ning Kei had never regarded him as the so-called lifelong enemy, he knew a lot about him. Through Yi Hongyu and Cheng Lixue, he knew many things that Long Qing had experienced, whether it was the gray eyes cultivation method, betraying Taoism, or sucking the consciousness and cultivation of many powerhouses from the Divine Hall in the Yu prison. So he wanted to test Long Qing. Ning Kei felt it was a pity that the iron arrow did not kill Long Qing, but he did not care too much. Just like what Jun Amo said to the chief monk of scripture on the cliff plateau, except for a few people, the academy never thought that there was no one who could not be killed. If he did not kill him today, he would wait until tomorrow. Thank you, senior brothers. Ning Kei bowed to the west and then to the east. He dismantled the iron bow and put it into the box. He tidied up his luggage and clothes and walked to the side of the city wall. He remembered that he saw the Empress jump down here many years ago. She was so resolute and happy at that time. Yes, sometimes one should be resolute in doing things, so that one could find happiness. Thinking of this, Ning Kei turned around and bowed to Chang An again. Then he jumped down from the city wall. A moment later, a dull crash sounded outside the city wall. Gravel flew everywhere, and smoke and dust rose. When the dust settled, a big pit appeared on the ground outside the city. Ning Kei's figure had disappeared. This was the coldest winter in 1,000 years. The wind and snow swept across the whole continent, and even the harbor of Yu Kingdom was frozen. In this winter, the West Hill Divine Palace completely suppressed the new stream. The former world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Yi Su, was burned to death in the capital of the Kingdom of Song. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, betrayed Haotian Taoism. The chief monk of scripture of Xiankong Temple was trapped in the depths of the Prajna Peak, and no one knew when he could get out. Jun Mo waved the iron sword and continued his battle in the underground world with tens of thousands of slaves. The dawn was getting closer and closer, and victory was in sight. But at the same time, the elite cavalry of the Right King's palace and the reinforcements of the White Tower Temple were also approaching. Yu Lian and Tang led the desolate man's tribe in the eastern wilderness for the last time. Ning Kei, who was supposed to guard Chang An, suddenly left. No one knew where he went. The Abbey Dean, Chen Mao, the eldest brother of the academy, and the drunkard were missing. The 3 most powerful cultivators in the limitless state disappeared at the same time. No one found any trace of them in the human world, and no one knew where they went. Even though the whole human world was disturbed by the whereabouts of these powerful cultivators, the human world had to return to the human world, and the war was still going on. The cold winter was finally over, and it was the early spring of the next year. The Tang Empire, besieged by the whole world, faced the war silently and firmly. The war in the Yan Kingdom was in a stalemate. The Tang Empire lacked warhorses, and the number of cavalry was much less than in previous years. It was difficult for them to take the risk and attack with full force. The journey of the desolate man's tribe to the south was also greatly hindered. The left king's palace, which was already in decline, had received strong support from the divine halls, especially from Long Qing and more than 2,000 cavalrymen of the divine halls. The Helan city in the depths of the Tianqi Mountains had not been opened, and the elusive Yu Lian did not appear in the golden tent. Maybe it had something to do with these things. To the relief of the Tang Empire, Taoism seemed to be facing more problems. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, was still alive. She kept meeting the devout believers in the Great River Kingdom, which directly caused chaos in Taoism. With the full support of the Great River Kingdom, Yi Hongyu began to support the new stream. She accused Hierarch Xiong Chumo and other divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill as shameless traitors who tried to pretend to be the spokesperson of Haotian. After a short period of suppression, the new stream ushered in a period of rapid development. With the support of the Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom, and the secret connivance of the divine halls of judgment, the new stream could be seen everywhere. Yi Su's disciples and the disciples of the Sword Garret led by Cheng Ziqing continued to travel and preach. The once weak flame gradually became bigger. More and more Taoist believers began to worship the saint called Yi Su in their homes. As for whether Yi Su was willing to do so, no one cared. The divine halls of West Hill was enraged. They issued several edicts to erase the sacredness of Yi Hongyu. However, the inheritance of the great divine priest of judgment had its own rules. The hierarch could not interfere at all. He could only continue to smear her moral character and faith. The next thing to be done was of course to purge the new stream. However, Yi Hongyu had secretly prepared a lot. Those loyal to her had already sneaked into the darkness. The bloody purge became meaningless. At this moment, everyone including the hierarch realized that it was not wise to force Yi Hongyu to betray the new stream. Taoism was thus divided. The divine halls of West Hill felt like it was in a precarious situation. Therefore, the suppression of the new stream was intensified to a frightening extent. There were dead people everywhere. Corpses of the new stream believers were nailed to wooden frames on both sides of the road. With the cawing of crows, blood became the theme of the year in the human world. However, faith was like weeds. The more you cut, the more it would burn. Next year, it would grow thicker and thicker. Taoism knew very well what kind of danger was hidden behind the blood. To solve the problem of the new stream, they had to start from the root. That was to kill Yi Hongyu, the Great Tang and the Great River Kingdom. Thousands of cavalrymen of the Divine Halls and more soldiers of the South Jin Kingdom were looking at the Great River Kingdom on the other side of the river. Zhao Nanhai was leading them. The middle-aged priest was nowhere to be found. Many people guessed that he had returned to the Jishou Abbey. The war had begun, but it had not yet entered the final stage. Many people were waiting for the result of the battle between the Golden Palace and the Northern Battlefront Army of the Tang Empire. They were waiting for the return of the most powerful cultivators. In the suffocating atmosphere, no one noticed that a new butcher shop had opened in a small town in the South Jin Kingdom. The town was facing the north. There was no need to mention the importance of the battle between the Great Tang and the Golden Palace. But what about those who had left the human world? They left because they had discovered a possibility. The Abbey Dean had confirmed that fact. They wanted to find that person. What would they do when they found that person? Some wanted to kill her, some wanted to save her, and some had no idea what to do at all. There were different kinds of people. But since those people had not returned to the human world, it meant that they had not found her yet. Yes, even if they were the most powerful cultivators in the distanceless state, it was still difficult to find her. There was a snow-capped peak in the far north, far away from the central plains or the human world. To be more precise, it was the furthest from the human world. No matter where one went to the north, he or she would eventually reach the foot of the snow-capped peak and the frozen hot sea. This was the coldest place in the world. Breath would turn into frost, and water droplets would turn into ice. Even the hardest steel could not withstand the freezing for a long time. The buildings by the hot sea were mainly made of wood and animal skins. This used to be the home of the desolate man. After the desolate man moved south, they left behind many shabby houses, which became a paradise for cold-resistant animals, such as snow foxes and long-tailed rats. There was no such thing as early spring under the snow-capped peak. The wind and snow kept howling like before, and thick clouds covered the night sky. It was a starless night, and the bright moon could not be seen. It was extremely dark everywhere, including the snow-capped peak. In a house abandoned by the desolate man, a light was suddenly turned on, which was particularly eye-catching in the dark environment. Strangely, a dozen long-tailed rats squatted at the root of the cedar tree, gnawing on the smelly fruits, but did not dare to approach it, as if there was a creature that they were afraid of living there. The light shone through the window, illuminating the snow-covered path in front of the house. After a while, footsteps were heard, and a woman came over with a heavy bucket. The woman walked slowly with her hands on her waist. She looked a little clumsy, and spilled a lot of water as she walked. Because of the cold, the water that spilled over the edge of the bucket was instantly frozen into the shape of quicksand. Strangely, the water in the bucket was not frozen, and there was not even a thin layer of ice on the surface. It was even steaming, and the dim yellow light was dispersed. What was even more surprising was that the clothes the woman wore were also very thin. On her somewhat old green clothes, the flowers woven with exquisite embroidery had been worn out. However, she didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of cold and just walked like this. Entering the hut, the woman put the bucket in the corner, and then walked to the table by the window. She looked in a certain direction and began to stare blankly. She was a little plump, or to be precise, a little fat. Her waist was a little thick, and her movements were a little clumsy. What was puzzling was that her waist was a little too thick. The light fell on her eyebrows and eyes. She still looked very young, as young as she had been in the past 10,000 years. Her expression was still so indifferent. Even when she looked at the snow-capped peak, she gave people a sense of condescension. She was, of course, Sang Sang. Or Haotian. The great, beautiful, plump, my heroine has finally appeared again. I'm secretly excited and clenched my fists. This feeling is so good. I'm willing to give her all my monthly tickets. Alright, I'm willing to play all the shameless things, just to make her and you happy. That's all. Chapter 1082. One day a year ago, there was a spring rain in the human world. Countless people saw the huge ship sailing towards the golden line in the divine light. She stood at the bow of the ship. Her indigo clothes were blown by the spring breeze, and the flowers gradually bloomed. Everyone thought that she had left the human world and returned to the divine kingdom. Who would have thought that she did not go back at all? She hid alone in the coldest northern land. She did not return to the divine kingdom. When she opened her eyes and saw the lush mountains, she knew that she could not go back because there was nothing but light in the divine kingdom. That was Min Mountain. She did not understand why. She used the Buddha's chessboard to live with Ning Ke for 1,000 years. She experienced the joys and sorrows of the human world and cultivated Buddhism for countless years. She finally washed away the 3 poisons in her body and got rid of the power of the human world. Why could she not go back? She stood in Min Mountain and thought silently for many days and nights. Finally, she figured out the reason. She was the choice of human beings, so her destination was the human world. This reason was not necessarily complete, but she did not know it yet. After figuring it out, she did not return to the West Hill Divine Palace. Instead, she chose to walk along the familiar hunting trails in Min Mountain and headed north. She kept walking. She passed by countless hunting villages, Helan City, Tianqi Mountains, and the ice field. Finally, she came to the cold northern land and the mountain. Her indigo clothes became thinner as she walked. The flowers on her clothes gradually faded. She knew that it was the power of time, and also because she was becoming weaker. Instead of returning to the Westhill Divine Palace, she went to the cold region of the far north, where no one had ever been. It was because she vaguely sensed some danger and wanted to go to a safe place. More importantly, she did not want anyone to see her like this. Her waist was now very thick and very bloated. She was different from her previous tall and fat appearance. She now looked very much like a pregnant woman. She was pregnant, so she did not want to be seen by humans. She was pregnant, and the child in her belly was naturally Ning Kei's. Perhaps because she was pregnant, she was gradually becoming weaker. She was going to become one of those weak ordinary humans that she used to look down on. God descended to the human world and gradually became a real human. She had experienced this process before. The headmaster had injected the power of the human world into her body and brought her to travel around the world to appreciate the beauty of the human world. Then, she was brought by Ning Kei to travel around the world and experience the world of mortals. During those days, she was gradually becoming a human. In the chessboard, she used Buddha's plan and Ning Kei's intention to cultivate again and purify her divine body. Finally, she succeeded in expelling the power of the human world in her body. She thought that she would win the battle against the headmaster, so she returned to indifference and was about to return to the divine kingdom. Unexpectedly, she was still left behind. She did not return to the divine kingdom. She thought that it was Ning Kei's trick. That trick was in her womb, a fetus. Sang Sang caressed her lower abdomen. There was no motherly radiance on her face, not even any emotion. She was just calm and a little unaccustomed. She looked at the snow-capped peak in the distance outside the window and woke up from her memories. She looked at the hot sea covered by snow not far away and thought of another memory. It was here, in the cold world covered by ice and snow, that the headmaster ate peony fish with her and him and immersed themselves in happiness in the hot spring. Then, the headmaster presided over her and Ning Kei's wedding and let them consummate their marriage. The headmaster rode the big black horse to the snow sea naked for hundreds of miles. The headmaster was so happy because he knew that she might be pregnant with Ning Kei's child and that it would be difficult for her to return to the divine kingdom. At that time, the headmaster said that Ning Kei and her consummate their marriage was so rare that it would definitely be recorded in the history books in the future. Yes, now she understood why. Sang Sang withdrew her gaze and lowered her head in silence. She was forced to stay in the human world twice by the trick of the master and his disciple. Even she did not know what to say. The methods of this pair of master and disciple were always so unexpected. They were despicable and despicable, like a spring breeze and rain. They were silent, but they were world-shaking. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. The clouds were blown away by the wind from the Black Sea on the snow-capped peak. Stars gradually appeared, and then a bright moon appeared in the sky. Sang Sang raised her head to look at the moon. Her right hand left her round belly and reached out to the night sky outside the window. She put her thumb and index finger together and exerted a little force. She wanted to crush the bright moon. She was not willing to do so. But now she could only think about it. That was what she was doing in the divine kingdom. And now she was even afraid of being discovered by the other her in the divine kingdom. Thinking of the faint uneasiness coming from the deepest part of her spiritual world, Sang Sang's face turned a little pale and she felt a little cold. She walked to the bed and picked up an animal skin to put on, especially covering her belly tightly. Then she flicked her fingers to light the firewood in the fireplace. She wanted to warm herself, which had nothing to do with the fetus in her belly. In fact, although she was getting weaker, she still did not need warmth. No matter how low the temperature was, it did not affect her. But she did it. She no longer thought and behaved according to the cold rules like before. It had nothing to do with the dark world. It was more like she was acting according to some kind of instinct. In short, she was becoming more and more like a human. Just like the oil lamp by the window, she did not need the lamp or the light. Lighting a lamp in such a dark world was meaningless except for exposing herself to danger. But she still did it because the light was really warm. Maybe it was also because the oil lamp used fish oil. There was no smoke, so it would not stain the eyes. Instead, there was a faint smell of oil. Sang Sang suddenly felt a little hungry. She looked out of the window and asked indifferently, "Why did you come back so late?" After the desolate men moved south, there was no one in the snow region. Who was she talking to? Outside the house came the sound of panting. An indigo-haired dog ran over with a frozen peony fish in its mouth. Because the hot sea was frozen, the peony fish had become extremely rare. The remaining ones were hidden in the depths of the sea. It was hard to imagine that an indigo-haired dog could go there to catch fish. Of course, if people knew that the indigo-haired dog was the famous indigo lion in the Buddha's chessboard world, it would be easy to accept. Sang Sang took the peony fish and ignored the indigo-haired dog, who stuck out its tongue and begged for food. She walked to the chopping board and cut the fish with her palm. Then she mixed the dipping sauce and began to eat. Her face was expressionless until she finished the fish. She frowned slightly because she felt that the fish was not as good as before. It had nothing to do with the fish itself or the dipping sauce. Although she used her palm, the fish she cut was definitely better than eldest brother's and Ning Kei's. Then why was it not as good as before? Or was it because of the lack of smoke? After eating the fish, she was still not satisfied and even felt hungrier. She said to the indigo-haired dog, "I want to eat meat." The indigo-haired dog widened its eyes and looked particularly innocent and pitiful. Sang Sang narrowed her eyes and looked particularly cold and ruthless. The indigo-haired dog lowered its head and walked to the vast snow sea with its tail between its legs. Sang Sang really wanted to eat meat. Although she did not need to eat, she was no longer as averse to human food as before. Most importantly, the little fellow in her belly was hungry. When she first found out that there was a fetus in her belly, she was shocked and confused, then angry and disgusted. It was not until now that she gradually learned to get used to this existence. She did not think that she had any affection for the fetus, because that was Ning Kei's trick. She was just hungry and wanted to eat meat to warm herself up. Yes, that must be it, she said to herself. After a long time, the indigo-haired dog came back dragging a freshly dead snow fox. Sang Sang was very satisfied and rewarded it with a hind leg after roasting the meat. She began to eat the roasted meat. Although it was much worse than the mutton on the grassland that the headmaster took her to eat, she still felt that it tasted good. Although she could not travel 1,000 miles in a single step to the Song Kingdom to have a water feast and then come back with the peony fish for supper, she was becoming more and more like an ordinary person. But it seemed good. Apart from her hiding by the snow sea, the most important thing to the human world was naturally the war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe royal court. The Golden Tribe invaded the south and looked like they were going to war. However, due to the pressure from Taoism, the Tang Empire could only use the northern battlefront army to resist. The grassland cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court was best at attacking like a raging fire. The Tang army was good at both attacking and defending, especially the northern battlefront general, Su Qi, who was known for his defense. He had been operating in the north of the Tang Empire for decades and had already built the border as strong as an iron bucket. If it were in the past, he would not have worried at all. But that was many years ago. Since a few years ago, the Golden Tribe royal court suddenly invaded the south and took over 7 villages, including the city of Wei and Kaiping. The Tang Empire's defense line in the north became much weaker. Especially in recent years, the Tang Empire spent a lot of money and labor to build dozens of barracks in the northwest and northwest of the Xiangwan Plain. The Golden Tribe royal court showed rare patience and used tens of thousands of slaves to dismantle the barracks one by one. For the Tang army, the most critical problem was the lack of warhorses. The Northern Battlefront Army, which used to dominate the north of the continent, could hardly move in formation now. The main force on the battlefield had become a mixed force of infantry and cavalry. It was hard for them to fight against the grassland cavalry. Especially more than 10 days ago, when the Chenggu Pass was lost, the most elite cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could even directly threaten the North military camp. At the beginning of the war, the weakness of the Tang army was beyond many people's expectation. Apart from these objective factors, it was also a strategic choice. In the early spring, the Tang army took the initiative to retreat and lengthen the supply line of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. It was strategically correct. But the Tang army did not expect the Golden Tribe Royal Court to be so crazy. They kept marching to the south, as if they did not care about the possibility of running out of food. According to the rules, the grassland cavalry carried enough food and dried meat. If they could not break the Northern Battlefront Army's defense line, they would never be able to return to the grassland. Such a desperate attitude was definitely not a wise military command. But now it seemed to be very effective. The grassland cavalry were like hungry wolves in a desperate situation. Their crazy momentum even overwhelmed the Tang army. Although the war was not going well, the atmosphere in the northern military camp was still normal. After all, the Northern Battlefront Army had been dealing with the Golden Tribe Royal Court for a long time. They were used to the savagery of the grassland barbarians. Of course they would not be scared. Su Qi stood on Xiangliang Mountain on the side of the camp. He looked at the grassland covered by the wind and snow in silence. Snow fell on his lips. His beard that he had just cut in the morning was dyed white, which made him look funny. Several officers followed around him, but they didn't smile. Looking at the great general slightly trembling back, it was as if they could feel the weight on his shoulders. "We can't retreat anymore." Su Qi was silent for a long time and said this. These words came out from his frozen lips without any emotion. It even gave people a feeling that he didn't expect to say these words. The officers were shocked. They didn't understand why the Northern Battlefront Army would suddenly change their strategy. Although the vanguard was fighting hard and the morale was low, they believed that the well-trained Northern Battlefront Army could definitely hold on for a longer time. Su Qi turned around and reached out to wipe off the snow in his beard. His hunched back straightened again and he gradually regained his power. Only now did he look like a top martial arts master of the Tang Empire. Looking at the disapproving looks on the officers' faces, he did not explain further. He looked at Huaying who was on standby and said, "I want you to guard Guha." Huaying had just risked his life to come back from the front line last night. His clothes were dirty and old, and he looked embarrassed. But his eyes were still calm. The military order was simple. There was no precondition or backup plan. The general only gave him one choice, which was to guard Guha. Huaying did not stay silent like the other officers. He was the one guarding Guha, and it would be his hundreds of soldiers who would die in the bloody battle. Because of the safety of the North military camp? Huaying asked. He was not challenging Su Qi's authority, nor was he doubting the validity of the military order. He just hoped that the general could give him a good reason to convince his subordinates, and more importantly, himself. Su Qi said indifferently, "After you leave, I will move the general's mansion out of the North military camp and close to you. If you can't guard Guha, it will be my turn." Why? At this moment, even the staff officers who had been suppressing their doubts couldn't help but express their objections. Why? Because if we can't guard Guha, Chanyu's men can pass through Chuanling, bypass my central camp, and enter Hebei County along the southwest side of Min Mountain. And south of Hebei County. Su Qi looked at Huaying and the officers and said calmly. 800 miles of plain will be the favorite battlefield of the grassland cavalry. Who can bear the responsibility if the cavalry goes straight to the center? The Tang Empire has a vast territory, but the Northern Battlefront Army has nowhere to retreat. Because Chang'an is right behind us. I like the description of the headmaster of academy, Ning Kei's methods. Su Qi's last sentence was a little early and harsh, but based on aesthetic interests, that sentence is so cool. If you want to write about war, you can't beat yourself if you don't say it at least once. Chapter 1083. I'll tell everyone on behalf of Old Master that he has something to deal with today. He's still outside, so the update will probably be delayed until late at night. Chapter 1084. Hua Ying and the other officers were silent. They knew the general was right. Even though the Northern Battlefront Army was facing a serious situation, the Tang Empire was surrounded by enemies. The Southern Battlefront Army and the Northeast Border Military had their own tasks and could not come to help. Guha was just a small dot on the territory of the Tang Empire. It was more than 2,000 miles away from Chang'an. But it seemed to be the last line of defense before Chang'an. That was why Su Qi decided to defend here. He even sent the general's mansion to the north. It was quiet on the mountain. No one spoke for a long time. Snowflakes were falling slowly. The temperature and the atmosphere became much colder. Even though they knew Su Qi was right, it would cost them a lot to ask the Northern Battlefront Army to give up their original plan and defend here. Could they really defend? They knew better than the ordinary soldiers that the imperial court had done its best. Everyone in the court had worked together. The ordinary people had been living a frugal life to provide the Northern Battlefront Army with food and fodder. Even after a cold winter, they could still eat fresh pork in the barracks. Their armors were not a problem. But the terrain of Guha had been determined. If the Northern Battlefront Army wanted to stop the Golden Tribe Royal Court from advancing, they would have to face more than 100,000 cavalrymen from the grassland. That would be the last thing they wanted to face. The Northern Battlefront Army used to dominate the north of the continent. They were not afraid of entering and leaving the grassland. Even the most ordinary soldiers were good at riding and shooting. They had never been afraid of fighting in the wild. But now they had to avoid fighting in the wild. Because they had a fatal problem, they lacked horses. Hua Ying broke the silence. He walked to Su Qi and knelt down on one knee. He said calmly and firmly, "If we can't defend, we will die." Su Qi looked at his gray sideburns and his face, which had aged rapidly because of the bitter cold weather at the frontier fortress. His heart was heavy, but he did not show it on his face. He said, "You are wrong. Even if you die, you must guard it for me." Hua Ying answered without hesitation, "Yes, sir." Su Qi helped him up and looked at him in silence for a long time. Finally, he could not help but sigh, "Thank you for all these years." Hua Ying smiled and said nothing. Since the war against the Golden Tribe Royal Court began, he had been guarding the northernmost part of the Tang Empire's territory. As the vanguard, he was responsible for the most important and the heaviest task. Even though he had the only cavalry left in the Northern Battlefront Army, it was still a tough job for him. If not for his high martial arts cultivation and the tight defense of the Tang army, he would have been nearly assassinated by the experts on the grassland several times. But Hua Ying never complained. Even when Su Qi wanted to transfer him back to the North military camp for a rest, he refused very seriously. Everyone in the Northern Battlefront Army knew the reason. Even the nobles in the imperial palace and the military officials in Chang'an knew the reason. Hua Ying's surname was Hua. She was from the Hua family and Hua Shanyu. Hua Shanyue followed Li Yu in the rebellion but failed and died on the spot. Those officers who secretly rebelled against the capital from the Gushan commandery were sent to the northern military camp by Ning Kei and exchanged their military achievements for honor. After several years, few of those people were still alive. Because of this incident, the once famous Hua family quickly declined. Now only Huaing still held an important position in the army. Therefore, Huaing worked very hard. He wanted to fight for the Hua family with his life. He wanted to fight for the glory of the Hua family and be high-spirited. Su Qi said, "Don't work too hard. It's better to be alive." Huaing did not answer directly. He said, "We will win." It was the end of spring in the 6th year of Zhengshi of the Tang Empire and the 3455th year of Daji of West Hill. The vanguard of the Northern Battlefront Army met the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court about 170 miles south of the city of Wei. They fought for more than 10 days, with some winning and some losing. Then the main force of the Northern Battlefront Army moved north and set up camp around Guha. The two most powerful military forces in the world officially began the competition. They fought for more than 10 days, with some winning and some losing. But Guha was still behind the Northern Battlefront Army camp and the cavalry of the Golden Tribe did not move south. The two sides took a break and resumed the confrontation. But everyone knew that it was different from the past. This confrontation would not last for more than 10 days or even years. It would only last 1 or 2 days at most before the war resumed. The Northern Battlefront Army had paid a heavy price to keep the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to the north of Guha. They were seriously short of horses. Even the most experienced soldiers who were good at archery and horsemanship could only use padeos to cover the flank of the formation. They could not fight in the front. The most powerful cavalry of the Northern Battlefront Army could only be used as infantry because they did not have warhorses. It was a waste in everyone's eyes. But who could change it? Since the day the divine halls of West Hill forced the Tang Empire to sign the peace treaty, the Xiangwan plain was ceded to them, and the warhorses were handed over as trophies. This infuriating and helpless scene was a fact. The morning sun rose from the east. Those with the best eyesight in the army and Su Qi in the general's mansion could vaguely see Min Mountain in the blood-red morning glow. Yesterday, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court temporarily retreated to the front line of Kaiping town. They rested and reorganized for the final attack. Facing the determined Tang army and the tricky combination of infantry and cavalry, Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could no longer be satisfied with the partial victory on the battlefield. He was even more anxious because of the passing time. Obviously, the upcoming field battle would be a storm that the Northern Battlefront Army had never faced before. Situilan stood on the meadow, holding the saber on her waist. She looked at the direction of the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Her dusty face was full of calmness and vigilance. Her slightly squinted eyes were shining colder than a blade. As a disciple of the academy and a descendant of the old general, she had performed well in the Northern Battlefront Army. She had long become the youngest general, and now she was Hua Ying's assistant. She was loved and respected by the soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army. The Northern Battlefront Army had been under great pressure for dozens of days, especially in the recent days. They had paid a heavy price. Some military doctors in the camp had not slept for 3 days and nights. Situilan looked calm when she thought of this. She did not let her bodyguards notice anything wrong. But the problem was still there. It was like a heavy stone pressing on her heart. Instead of retreating, the Golden Tribe Royal Court rested and reorganized. The general's order was to defend Guha with all their might. It seemed that this field was destined to become a graveyard for hundreds of thousands of lives. But no one knew who would be qualified to write the epitaph for the dead in the end. She was in a high position in the Northern Battlefront Army. She knew a lot of military information that the ordinary soldiers did not. Yesterday, the reinforcement from the Gushan Commandery tried to sneak attack a troop of the Golden Tribe Royal Court from the foothills of Min Mountain. But they were seen through in advance. The tribe quickly moved closer to the Golden Tribe Royal Court, so the Northern Battlefront Army lost the best chance to disrupt the enemy's base. What else could they do? Situilan stared at the sand table for a long time last night. She compared the knowledge taught by the teachers from the academy and the military ministry with her own experience in the army, but she still could not find a solution. General Su Chi was the only one who could decide the strategy of the Northern Battlefront Army. Or further south, the siblings in the Imperial Palace and the teachers from the academy. But she also wanted to help. Unfortunately, Situilan had many questions in her heart besides the heavy stone. General Su Chi's strategy could not be said to be wrong. Whether it was the retreat at the beginning or the bloody defense at the moment, the former was to trade space for time and exhaust the enemy's army. The latter was because they could not show any signs of defeat and had to use absolute iron and blood to stabilize the Tang Empire's northern border. However, it was obvious that there should be many better, or more flexible, or less desperate ways to deal with the situation. General Su Chi's strategy was to attract all the main forces of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to Guha. If they could win, it would be difficult for the main cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to escape. In the hundreds of years of war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court, the most troublesome thing about the Golden Tribe Royal Court was that they could escape. Even if the Tang army won, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could quickly retreat to the depths of the grassland, and the Tang army could not destroy their main force. There was a lot of military wisdom in this strategy, but it had to be carried out. Most importantly, the Tang army had to win first, so they could talk about how to destroy the main force of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. How to win this war? Situilan could not figure it out. She did not think General Su Chi could. So she was more and more confused about what the general or the imperial court was thinking. She was neither a pessimist nor a defeatist. Just like her bodyguards and the Tang soldiers in the camp, she was not afraid of the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. But her reason told her that victory was still far away. The Northern Battlefront Army was of high quality, and they were backed by Guha, so they had the advantage. Not to mention the right time and the right people, they should not make her so desperate. But there was still the same problem: no horses. No war horses. The Northern Battlefront Army did not have enough war horses. Situilan walked back to the camp with her bodyguards. Along the way, the soldiers stood up and saluted her. She could clearly tell that although they saluted in the same way, there was a big difference. For example, the new soldiers who had been in the Northern Battlefront Army for less than 2 years looked calmer and a little shy. But the old veterans looked indifferent. As for the look in their eyes, they were sneakily glancing at her. Although it was just a small movement, she could clearly feel it. Those veterans reminded her of someone she had not seen for a long time. It was her former classmate, and later the so-called teacher, the guy who had stood on the top of the world. Chapter 1085. That guy also looked tired. He used to peek at her like this, whether it was in the wetland of the academy, in the House of Red Sleeves, or in the north of Yen Kingdom. He always glanced at her chest, waist, buttocks, and legs. He thought she didn't know, but she knew everything. She was just too shy to say it. Of course, Situilan thought of Ning Quebec. She didn't suddenly recall her youth when she was in a desperate situation. She just wanted to gain some strength from it. The veterans in the camp were very similar to Ning Quebec. They were all unimaginably tough and could do things that most people couldn't imagine. But what made her sad was that deep in the indifferent expressions of those old soldiers, there was still unwillingness. Especially when they saw the warhorses led by her bodyguards, the envy and unhappiness in their eyes could be clearly seen. Yes, it was still the same question. Situilan lowered her head and thought about why the imperial court agreed to cede Xiangwan Plain to the Golden Tribe Royal Court when they negotiated with the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did they agree to compensate the Golden Tribe and the Yen Kingdom with warhorses? Yes, the situation was really serious at that time. But didn't the imperial court know that if they agreed to the conditions, they would be committing suicide? That black noose had been falling slowly in the air for several years. Now it finally fell on the grassland, in front of every soldier of the Northern Battlefront Army. Even the people of Chang'an knew it, so did the ministers in the imperial court. Princely Pei Yan even hanged himself because of it. Situilan knew it was the Academy's decision. More precisely, it was Ning Kei's decision. Why did the Academy agree? Situilan walked to the tent and looked at the man and the woman by the table. She felt a bit weird. She was a student of the Academy, and these two could really represent the Academy. Thinking of her previous dissatisfaction, she didn't know what to say. Mu Yu's favorite light yellow dress had long been replaced by practical cotton-padded clothes. Sixth brother was still naked from the waist up like he did at the back of the mountain of the Academy, wearing only a leather jacket. Situilan could not say anything bad to the two Academy teachers, because these days, they were supposed to be sitting on the clouds like immortals, but they were living and fighting like ordinary soldiers. The situation of the war had changed. Cultivators had been assassinating the enemy's generals all the time. If Mu Yu had not organized the array tactical masters to set up several exquisite arrays in the camp, and if Mr. Six had not waved his hammer, many Tang generals would have been assassinated by the Golden Tribe royal court at all costs. As for Mr. Six's sleepless nights repairing the weapons of the Tang army, it was not worth mentioning. Situilan found that one person was missing and asked, "Where did Mr. Fourth go?" Mr. Fourth of the Academy, Fan Yu, was now the brains of the vanguard of the Northern Battlefront Army. General Huang trusted him very much. He was the one who planned everything. Mu Yu took out a towel from the basin and wrung it dry. Then she walked to her and wiped the dust off her face. She said with pity, "I don't care where he went. You are such a beautiful girl. Even if you can't dress up, you should at least make yourself clean." Situilan was not in the mood to care about her own appearance. She smiled bitterly. When she thought of the battle array of the Golden Tribe royal court on the meadow, she became serious again. She asked Mu Yu in a low voice, "When will Mr. Third take action? When will the Enlightenment Doctrine and the Desolate Man arrive?" The current situation was extremely favorable to the Northern Battlefront Army. She could not think of any change. However, General Su Qi was still calm. She naturally thought that the Academy must have arranged many powerful fighters. Mu Yu had been setting up arrays for many days and nights. She looked exhausted. Hearing Situilan's words, she said after a moment of silence, "I don't know where senior sister is either." Hearing this, Situilan was disappointed and confused. According to the original plan, she should have conquered the eastern wilderness in early spring and come here. She should have taken action. Maybe it is not the right time yet. There must be a reason. Mu Yu put her arms around her and sat down. She asked her to finish her breakfast and comforted her. Everything that went against common sense must have its own reasons. For the army, common sense was the objective judgment of victory and the subsequent calm response. Huang stood outside the tent. He looked at the bloody morning glow and the countless tents of the Golden Tribe royal court in the distance. He always felt that the general's response was unreasonable. What was the reason? A staff officer handed him a pair of binoculars. He took the binoculars and looked in the direction of the Golden Tribe royal court. Then he looked to the east, dozens of miles away. He observed in silence for a long time. The binoculars were made by the Academy and brought to the front line by Mr. Sixth. Now almost all the important generals in the Northern Battlefront Army had one. Once they used it, they would treat it like a treasure and would never let it go. Huang sighed. With the help of the Academy, he could clearly see the movements of the Golden Tribe royal court. But the enemy did not notice it at all. If it were in the past, the Northern Battlefront Army would definitely win the war. Especially now, Chanyu had taken the risk and led his entire tribe to attack the south. He wanted to fight a war that could destroy the country. He did not care about the retreat at all. His troop formation was unparalleled. But in the eyes of the experienced Tang generals, it was also full of loopholes. As long as they could send out a strong cavalry, they could definitely make the enemy suffer. Give me 10,000, no, even 8,000. Hua Ying put down the binoculars and looked to the north. He said in a trembling voice, give me 8,000 good horses, and I can defend Guha. I can even drive them to the north of the city of Wei. Chanyu's choice was too confident. In Hua Ying's eyes, it was a great opportunity. That was why his voice was trembling. It was an unbearable pain to lose such an opportunity. Su Qi firmly believed that the northern battlefront army could defeat the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court in the field. Hua Ying was confused. He would not question the military order, but he painfully wished that he could have 10,000 more horses. But that would not happen. Even if Haotian came back to the human world, there was no way he could make 10,000 well-trained horses for the Tang in such a short period of time. The Golden Tribe royal court dared to attack the south. Chanyu was so confident and even arrogant in his troop formation. He was not afraid of the final battle in the field tomorrow. Wasn't it because he knew that the Tang had no horses? Many soldiers of the Tang army imagined that the imperial court had secretly raised a lot of horses to give the enemy the heaviest and most unexpected blow in the final battle. But that was just a fantasy. Chanyu would not think so. Raising horses required a lot of fodder, stables, manpower, and resources. It was impossible for such a large number of war horses to be secretly raised in the provinces of the Tang Empire. How could they hide from the omnipresent eyes of Taoism? Even if they could, what was the use of those untrained horses that had never been on the battlefield? War horses that had been on the battlefield for a long time. Situilan was thinking, the cavalrymen were thinking, Hua Ying was thinking, and everyone was thinking. They were all desperately and angrily screaming in their hearts. Why did they not have horses? They did not need war horses that had been on the battlefield for a long time. Even an ordinary horse would do. As long as it could move the cavalrymen, it did not matter if it was a handsome stallion, a graceful mare, a naughty colt, a Hatao horse, a river pony, or a grassland horse. Any horse would do. As long as it was a horse. Because without horses, the Tang Empire would not survive. In the northern battlefront army, only General Su Qi still had the last bit of confidence. Yu Lian did not show up in the grassland. The national master and the dozen high priests of the Golden Tribe royal court did not come to the front. They were in the rear, heavily protected by the grassland cavalrymen. Su Qi's confidence did not come from Yu Lian or the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, Tang. He had already received information from Helan City that the desolate man's tribe in the eastern wilderness was pinned down by the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls from the Yen Kingdom. They could not come to help in a short time. This was, of course, very bad news. Fortunately, he received another piece of news from the academy dozens of days ago, which brought him the long-awaited spring breeze. Countless wagons had already left the town where the northern military camp was located. They were transported to the back of Guha and hidden in the supply camp of the main force of the northern battlefront army. To keep it a secret, even Hua Ying did not know about it. The dawn had not come yet, and the moon had already fallen asleep. The sky was turning white in the east, and there were still some dim stars in the west. The people on the grassland had already woken up. In the countless tents of the Golden Tribe royal court, children's laughter and women's worried whispers could be heard everywhere. Of course, most of the noise was the sound of scimitars and leather armors, the restless neighing of warhorses, and the crackling of hay. According to the tradition of the grassland cavalrymen, no one dared to bring their families with them. But this time, the Golden Tribe royal court was invading the south, and all the men brought their wives, children, and slaves. Chanyu and the nobles were glad that they had made a lot of preparations in advance, so they did not become a burden to the warriors, but became the best motivation for them to fight the Tangs bravely. The warriors of the Golden Tribe had already lined up. They looked solemn and determined. The cavalrymen of different tribes were also putting on their leather armors and preparing their weapons with the help of their slaves or family members. It was the darkest time before dawn, but the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did not want to take advantage of the darkness to attack the Tang army in the south, because the darkness was unfair to everyone. The cavalrymen were too fast, so they needed a good vision. Now that the Golden Tribe had the absolute advantage, they would not take such a risk. The reason why they started to line up so early was because of the need of the war, and also because of the fighting experience imprinted in the blood of all the grassland cavalrymen. Today would be a long and arduous battle. Humans could persevere with their spiritual will, but the warhorses could not. Therefore, before entering the battlefield, they had to feed the warhorses well, with the best fodder and even some expensive grains and beans, with enough water and salt. All of these preparations had to be completed 4 hours before the battle officially began. 4 hours later, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe would sweep over and devour everything in sight. There are some problems with the schedule these 2 days, so it is very likely that the update will not be completed tomorrow. If not, I will report to you, and everything will be back to normal the day after tomorrow. Chapter 1086. Chanyu walked out of the golden tent and looked around. A satisfied smile appeared on his dark and handsome face. He was satisfied with the calmness of his subordinates, and even more satisfied with what he had built for so many days and years. In his opinion, the northern battlefront army, which was seriously short of cavalrymen, was no match for the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe. The battle between the two sides had been in a stalemate a few days ago. On the one hand, the northern battlefront army was unexpectedly tough. On the other hand, the Tang armaments and cultivators were beyond imagination. On the other hand, the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did not go all out. In a battle between infantry and cavalry, no matter who had the innate advantage, the cavalry was psychologically superior. If infantry wanted to resist the cavalry, they would have to pay more in physical and mental strength. A few days ago, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe was exhausting the Tang infantry's physical and mental strength. More importantly, they were gradually wearing down the enemy's will and courage. At the same time, they were boosting their morale and confidence of winning. Today was the day of the final battle. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe would attack with all their strength. They would attack without reserve. They would attack without leaving any survivors. They would return the humiliation they had suffered for hundreds of years to the Tangs. They would completely defeat the main force of the northern battlefront army. It was a risky strategy. But in Chanyu's eyes, it was a sure-win strategy. After testing the enemy a few days ago, he was sure that the Tangs did not have any hidden tricks. So, he would crush them head-on. Dawn was coming. The white light from the east covered 1/10 of the sky. The warm morning light fell on the grassland and on Chanyu's face, making his cheeks look stronger. He looked at the grassland in the south and the Tang camp in the distance. He seemed to see the cavalry of the Golden Tribe surging like a tide and the ground of the grassland starting to shake. Then, just like a few days ago, the Tang camp would launch all kinds of armaments. The catapults would make a dull sound. The spears in front of the camp fences would be sharp. The iron thorns in the trenches would be cold. The swords of the cultivators from the central plains would shine. The chi of heaven and earth would change violently. However, those would be drowned by his cavalry. General Buell walked over. He looked at the wisest Chanyu in the history of the grassland and the man he admired the most. He said in a trembling voice, "From today on, you will be the king of the world." The chief no longer smiled, remaining calm as usual. It was because he was certain that he could remain this calm. He looked past the Tang camp in the south and at a location further south. According to the imperial advisor, that was Chang'an. That gentle but fearsome emperor had died 6 years ago, but his daughter was still alive. Chanyu thought to himself that he would kill her after conquering Chang'an and then stab his penis into her body. Ada also appeared outside the golden tent. He did not take a bath last night and the blood stains on his body had already coagulated, giving off a faint stench which attracted the mosquitoes and flies in the weeds. The nobles looked at the former slave, who was now the most powerful warrior of the Golden Tribe. Their eyes were full of hatred and fear, and they did not want to stand too close to him. Ada was injured on the battlefield a few days ago. In order to remember this injury, he purposely did not wash off the blood on his body. It was not because he wanted to remember the humiliation, but because he wanted to remember that he should learn from the opponent. That day, he hid among the cavalry of the Golden Tribe and broke through the trenches and spear fences of the Tang army. Then he hid in the dead bodies of his companions and tried to assassinate Huaying, the vanguard general of the Northern Battlefront Army. Ada had always wanted to kill Huaying. At first, he only wanted to take revenge on Ning Ke for the bloody captive slaughter in Chang'an. But later, he was not reconciled to the fact that he failed to kill Huaying. The unreconciled feeling was like a poisonous snake that made him take the risk to assassinate Huaying. His assassination failed because from the very beginning, or more precisely, from the moment he hid among the cavalry and rushed to the front of the Tang camp, his whereabouts and purpose had been clearly predicted by someone. Huaying did not show up. What came was an iron hammer and a tactical array. Ada was ambushed and was immediately injured. But he was after all one of the most powerful cultivators in the Golden Tribe royal court. He finally broke through the encirclement of the Tang army and escaped back to the Golden Tribe, but he was extremely embarrassed. Regardless of his injury, he visited the Nation Master late at night and learned who those people were. The one who saw through his plan was Fan Yu, the fourth of the academy. The warrior who waved the iron hammer was Mr. 6 of the academy. And the woman who used the tactical array as if it was alive was Mr. 7 of the academy. The 3 masters of the academy were all at the peak of the see-through state. In the world of cultivation, they were certainly great figures. But for a truly powerful cultivator like Ada, he could easily defeat 10 of them at once. But he still failed miserably, which he could not understand. After thinking for a whole night, Ada did not become angrier or dizzy with anger. Instead, he became much calmer. This was the first time he fought with the academy on the battlefield and he learned a lot. He respected the academy a lot more and was more determined to destroy the academy. That was why he was so calm when he looked at the Tang camp under the morning light. Even though he was hated and feared by those nobles, he was still calm. The Golden Tribe would definitely win today and he did not need to do anything. They also believed that the Golden Tribe would win, so Chanyu and Ada were calm. But more men from the grassland were fanatical. They looked at the Tang army in the south with cold eyes like wolves. As long as they defeated the Tang Empire, the Golden Tribe royal court would be the overlord of the world. In the New World, they would occupy the most prosperous town in the Central Plains, wear the smoothest silk, have the most beautiful women, drink the strongest wine, drink the clearest stream, and eat the softest bread. These were all gifts from the everlasting heaven. If they did not accept them, they would be punished by heaven. Chanyu, Ada, and countless cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe were looking at the Tang camp in the south. In the Tang camp, General Huaying and his subordinates were also looking at the north. In the temporary general's mansion, Su Qi was also looking at the north. He was looking at the hungry wolves in the morning light and the morning wind. People sensed the danger. The war in the previous 10 days had been extremely fierce. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did try their best, but the Northern Battlefront Army's defense was extremely tough. That was why they were evenly matched. But today was different. It was obvious that the Golden Tribe was going all out today. Chanyu and his subjects were ready to bet the fate of the entire tribe on the battle that was about to begin. Hua Ying's face turned pale. With the help of the telescope, he could see everything happening in the Golden Tribe royal court. He saw the grassland barbarians feeding the horses with food, water, and salt. He even saw the lamb bones in the pot. As an experienced general of the Tang army, he knew the habits of the grassland cavalrymen. In 2 hours at most, the well-fed warhorses would lead the wolf-like barbarians to him. That was the most regular rule of fighting for the grassland cavalrymen. That was also why he was so angry. Chanyu and his grassland cavalrymen were not afraid to let the Tang army see what they were doing. That meant they had already set the time of the battle and informed the Tang army. What kind of confidence was that? And what kind of humiliation was that for the Tang army? If it were 10 years ago, Hua Ying would have sent his cavalrymen to attack as soon as he saw the first scene. He would have been able to win the battle when the enemy was unprepared. But he could not do that now. He did not have enough cavalrymen, nor could he prepare the warhorses in batches like the Northern Battlefront Army did when they were in their prime, if. That sentence and that judgment came to Hua Ying's mind again. If the Great Tang still had a true cavalry force and a sufficient number of warhorses, would the chief still dare to advance so recklessly? No, what awaited the Golden Tribe royal court today was destruction. If there were really if, how could there be so many ifs in the world? There were never ifs. That was why the Golden Tribe royal court would not be destroyed today. That was why Chanyu and his grassland cavalrymen dared to attack so recklessly. That was why the Northern Battlefront Army would face such an ending. He could even see the bleak color on the word ending and smell the despair in it. Different from General Hua Ying, the ordinary soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army were still calm and determined. They did not know the secret military intelligence or the result of the sand table. They did not know or even did not care about the odds of winning the battle. They only knew to fight, and they were as fearless as they were in the past. Looking at the Tang army who were silently preparing for the battle, Situilan slightly closed her eyes to hide the gloominess. Then she quickly raised her head and cheered herself up. She did not want to affect the morale of the army. She suddenly noticed a Tang soldier near the stove. At this time, all the Tang soldiers had finished their breakfast quickly and started to sharpen their weapons. Only that Tang soldier was still standing beside the pot, holding a big bowl in his left hand and a wooden spoon in his right hand. He was eating the vegetable porridge in big mouthfuls, and after eating the meat, he was even more happy to say something. "What's your name?" Situilan walked to the stove and said while looking at the Tang soldier. The Tang soldier was not old, but from the calluses on his fingers that held the porridge bowl and the indifferent expression on his face, it could be seen that he was a veteran who had been through hundreds of battles. The soldier looked at her and was stunned. He put the bowl on the stove and saluted. He reported, "I'm Wang Wu, the commander of the 4th Scout Team of the Vanguard Battalion." "Nice to meet you, General." "Wang Wu? That's a neat name." Situilan said, "But you are not neat enough. Didn't you see that the others have already returned to the camp to prepare for the battle? Why are you still here?" Wang Wu showed respect to her, but it did not mean he was afraid. He explained in a sincere and funny way, "The scouts don't have to go to the battle for now. Besides, it will take at least 2 hours for the barbarians to arrive. Why are you in such a hurry? There is so much meat in the porridge today. It would be a pity if we don't finish it." Situilan slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "You are indeed a veteran." Wang Wu scratched his neck with the end of the wooden spoon and said with a smile, "You flatter me." Situilan said, "You have such a good appetite so early in the morning. It seems that you are very confident about today's battle. If everyone can be like you, or..." She stopped abruptly when she said the word or. The lazy smile on Wang Wu's face suddenly disappeared. He looked at her calmly and even coldly and said, "General, or what? Or a miracle?" "You know, there is no miracle." Situilan stared at his eyes coldly. After a moment of silence, she said, "What do you want to say?" "There is a lot of meat in the porridge today, and even more vegetables. Although the food in the Northern Battlefront Army has always been excellent, it is still too good to be true. It makes me suspicious." Wang Wu was not afraid of her eyes at all. He calmly said, "This is the last meal before we die, so General wants us to have a good meal?" Situilan said coldly, "What do you want to say?" Wang Wu pointed at the Tang soldiers who were silently preparing for the battle in the tent not far away and said, "I know that we will definitely lose today's battle. In fact, many people know it, but they just don't say it." Situilan was silent for a long time. Wang Wu said, "If you think I have shaken the morale of the army, you can kill me on the spot." Situilan said, "What I want to know is why you are telling me this." Wang Wu said, "Because I want to tell General Su, the Imperial Court, and the Academy. I am not reconciled. I don't want to lose. I don't understand why the Northern Battlefront Army would end up like this." Situilan said in a low voice, "It is the mission of the Tang soldiers to guard the border for the country. Why are you not reconciled? The question is, why did General Su send us out of Guha? Why do we have to fight here? I am not afraid of death, but I don't want to be sent to die." Wang Wu suddenly became angry. He threw the wooden spoon into the porridge pot and shouted at Situilan, "The Xiangwan Plain was ceded by the Imperial Court. The battlefield was chosen by the General's mansion. Why do you want us to die? Why do you want us to die? You generals, even if you want us to die, can't you win?" Situilan reached out her hand to stop her soldiers from drawing out their swords. She was silent for a long time because she did not know how to answer the old soldier's angry question. Yes, the Imperial Court wanted the Tang army to keep the enemy out of the border. They would do it even if they had to sacrifice their lives. But the Imperial Court should at least let them win. Otherwise, how could they die in peace? Then what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? She looked at Wang Wu and asked in a serious tone. Wang Wu did not expect to hear such an answer. He was silent for a long time and smiled gloomily. He did not say anything and turned back to his camp. Situilan looked at his back and did not continue to ask. She had guessed what the young soldier wanted. It was what she wanted too. It was what the entire Northern Battlefront Army and even the Tang Empire wanted. Wang Wu walked back to his tent and stared at the half-bag of hay outside for a long time. He was a scout, one of the few soldiers in the Northern Battlefront Army who had horses. But 2 years ago, his horse died outside the city of Wei. Since then, he had never had a chance to have his own mount. A scout without a mount was worse than a dog. Wang Wu often thought so. In the past 2 years, he felt that his life was worse than a dog's. If a dog could still bark, what could he do? Wang Wu kicked away the hay and was about to wash his face. When he saw the pale face in the bucket, he frowned and suddenly began to hate his current mood. He took a deep breath and suppressed the despair and anger in his heart. He drew out the broadsword he brought from the city of Wei and ordered his subordinates to prepare for the battle. A scout without a mount was still a Tang soldier. Even if it was a hopeless battle, he had to fight to the end. He looked at the Golden Tribe camp in the north and suddenly thought of the city of Wei. When the city of Wei was massacred by the Golden Tribe cavalry, only a few people escaped, and he was one of them. After returning to the Northern Battlefront Army, he got a mount again after his identity was verified. Then he lost it again, just like he used to have the city of Wei, but in the end, he lost everything. Wang Wu often missed the days when he went hunting with General Ma on the grassland. He missed the days when he followed his seniors to the Shubi Lake to kill the horse gangs and rob gold and silver. Those days were gone forever. Under his indifferent and tired look, there was anger and hatred that had never been extinguished. He always thought about defeating the barbarians on the grassland with the northern battlefront army and taking back the city of Wei. But it was difficult. And looking at the situation today, it seemed that that day would never come. He wanted a warhorse, a handsome one. He wanted to ride it and fight against the enemy. If he had a warhorse and his comrades all had warhorses, then his dream would come true. This obsession kept tormenting him. Looking at the horses in the Golden Tribe royal court, he almost went crazy. At this moment, as long as someone could give him a horse, he would give up all his wealth and even his life. He would even wash the feet of those stinky grassland barbarians and kill them later. If someone could give him a horse, he would do anything for that person. Unfortunately, there was no if. Wang Wu lowered his head and was about to wash his face. The bloodiest battle in 1,000 years would be coming. It would consist of countless battles, and countless people would die. The northern battlefront army might lose, and all the Tang soldiers would die for the country. He did not want to die with dirt on his face and vegetables in his mouth. The next moment, he suddenly felt dizzy because the water in the basin was shaking. His eyebrows and eyes looked strange in the water. They were not as gloomy as before, but rather funny. The people of the Golden Tribe royal court who were dozens of miles away also felt the shaking. More than 100,000 grassland cavalries were preparing for the battle and feeding their horses water. Suddenly, they found that those brave but tame warhorses suddenly became restless. Some of them kept shaking their heads and refused to drink water or eat fodder. Some of them looked somewhere in fear and kicked their front hooves anxiously, as if that was the only way to convince themselves that the shaking was not real, but not something they were most afraid of. The entire field started shaking. From the city of Wei in the north to the meadow outside Guha, the wheels of the wagons in the camps of both sides were squeaking. Some soldiers who were not paying attention even lost their balance because of the shaking. Ada jumped onto the roof of a big car and squinted his eyes to look at the place where the tremor came from. His eyesight was very good and he should be the first one to see the movement over there. Therefore, he was also the first one to be shocked speechless. That childish but proud and cold face was full of disbelief. Following that, more and more people saw the cause of the tremor. Wu Wu's eyebrows suddenly rose high, and the corners of his lips curled up high. His hands began to tremble, and the wet towel fell into the basin, splashing water everywhere. Just like him, the scouts inside and outside the camp and the soldiers of the northern battlefront army in the distance all felt the vibration. They looked to the northwest. The camp became dead silent. Everyone was shocked and confused, but more than that, they were excited and expectant. The field under the morning sun was very clear. There was no wind, no dust, and the sight was very clear. On the horizon in the northwest, a large dark cloud was moving slowly. The reason why it was moving slowly was not because the dark cloud was moving too slowly, but because the area covered by the dark cloud was so wide that it gave people an illusion. The dark cloud quickly flew for more than 10 miles and came to the edge of the field near Guha. Everyone could see clearly that it was not a dark cloud, but a large area of dense smoke and dust. The smoke and dust were the dust caused by the hooves of the horses. Countless wild horses were sweeping towards them. The morning sun reflected the sky red. The warm light entered the smoke and dust, as if the morning glow was plucked from the sky to the ground. The galloping horses seemed to be burning. It was extremely beautiful and dazzling. No one could count how many wild horses were hiding in the morning glow. No one could figure out how many wild horses could cause such an earth-shattering scene. People only knew that an unimaginable number of wild horses had suddenly appeared in the world. These wild horses, were running towards the Tang army. The grassland was still silent, so the hooves of the wild horses in the distance became clearer. It fell in everyone's ears like thunder and knocked on everyone's heart. All the soldiers in the vanguard battalion of the Tang army stopped preparing for the battle. No matter how strict the military discipline was, no matter how strong the spirit was, they could not stop looking at the morning glow and the overwhelming wild horses. Some Tang soldiers began to rub their eyes, wondering if they were dazzled. They told themselves in their hearts that it must not be. But they still found it unbelievable because the scene was really unbelievable. Some Tang soldiers did not even blink their eyes, such as Wang Wu. He stared at the wild horses in the morning glow as if he was looking at a little girl in a tavern in the city of Wei. He was afraid that if he blinked, those wild horses would disappear. Situilan tightly pursed her lips. Her face was a little pale, and her hand holding the hilt trembled. She knew it was not an illusion, but she was not sure that those wild horses were really coming towards the Tang army. What if the wild horses suddenly ran to the vast grassland in the east and disappeared as suddenly as they came? What if they were just passing by? The Tang people's feelings were as complicated as their expressions. They were nervous, eager, shocked, worried, and even panicked. They watched the morning glow getting closer and closer, and the wild horses filling the sky getting closer and closer. They became more and more nervous. The morning glow finally dissipated and returned to dust. The grassland outside Guha was completely covered by the wind and sand. More than 100,000 warhorses in the tribe of the Golden Tribe neighed in panic. The sunlight was blocked and it was difficult to see clearly. Situilan closed her eyes and then opened them. Then she saw a brown wild horse in front of her, looking at her. The brown horse's eyes were full of curiosity like a human baby, extremely pure and innocent. As the dust gradually settled, the Tang army cheered. The soldiers' cheers were so loud that it was hard to describe. They even seemed a little crazy, like some kind of cry to vent their emotions. It was all true. Those who came to the Tang army in the morning glow were indeed horses. They were wild horses, countless wild horses. Those wild horses strolled casually in the Tang army's camp, as if they were strolling on the grassland. Their long manes fluttered in the morning breeze. They were extraordinarily handsome and their eyes were full of curiosity. Just like the brown wild horse, it could not understand why the woman in front of it was crying. The wild horses could not understand why these humans were cheering, why their voices were so hoarse, why they kept rubbing their necks, why they were laughing, and why they were crying. That was because they did not understand that for the Tang people, their arrival was a real miracle. For the past 10 days, the past year, the past 3 years, the Tang Empire, from the emperor to the ministers, from the common people to the blood-soaked soldiers, had been praying for a sufficient number of warhorses. But they knew that it was an extravagant hope, because the Xiangwan plain was gone, and Taoism would not give the Tang Empire a chance. Seeing that the war that would determine the fate of the entire world was about to begin, people like General Huang, Situilan, and Wang Wu could not help but murmur. They were even willing to sacrifice their lives and dignity to pray for the Tang Empire, who no longer believed in Haotian, to give the Tang Empire a chance. The Tang Empire needed horses, war horses. Haotian seemed to have heard the voices of all the Tang people, as if she had forgotten about their betrayal. She stood in the morning glow and said 3 words to the quagmire in the depths of the wilderness. "We must have horses." So the Tang Empire had horses. The Tang army instantly entered a state of ecstasy. In sharp contrast, the dozens of tribes of the Golden Tribe royal court were still silent, and all the grassland people looked extremely pale. The Golden Tribe royal court dared to invade the south and start a war with the Tang Empire, and all the tribes followed Chanyu without hesitation. It was all based on one fact: the Tang army was short of horses. However, just before the war, countless wild horses came from the depths of the grassland. What What was going on? Where did these wild horses come from? Why did the tribes live in the grassland all year round without knowing about the existence of these wild horses? Which grassland could support so many wild horses? Some elders of the tribes and a few brave travelers remembered a rumor from decades ago. It was said that in the depths of the West Wilderness, in the swamp where even the wolves did not dare to enter, lived a group of Pegasus who could walk on water and eat clouds. Those Pegasus were the mounts of the Tengri heaven, but they lived in the human world. Could it be that the black mass of wild horses in the south was the legendary Pegasus? If they were the mounts of the Tengri heaven, why would they go to the Tang army? The elders were pale as if they were about to faint. The travelers were trembling, and the warriors of the tribes almost dropped their machetes. The women began to chant in a frightened tone, hoping to get the protection of the Tengri heaven. Looking at the overwhelming wild horses in the south, the grassland people suddenly felt that they had been abandoned by the Tengri heaven. No one understood why this happened. In the carriage behind them, the national master of the Golden Tribe did not understand either. But he knew that everything had changed. He sighed deeply. Several priests had been ordered to go to the Golden Tribe. He and the rest of the high priests formed a carriage array. He did not show up on the battlefield because he was afraid of Yu Lian and the Tang Empire. He had been persuading Chan Yu not to act so rashly because he felt that the academy and the Tang Empire would not be so simple. Unfortunately, he failed to persuade them. The outcome of today's war seemed to have been decided. But some people did not think so. Looking at the dusty Tang army in the south, Chan Yu's handsome face was still cold. As the overlord of the grassland, he pushed the Golden Tribe royal court to invade the south with great courage. He took the risk of being surrounded by the Tang army and fought this war head-on because he believed that he could win in the end. He wanted to avenge his brother. Most importantly, he wanted to rule the entire human world. He wanted his subordinates to become the nobles of every country in the Central Plains. He wanted his descendants to occupy the beautiful mountains and rivers in the south forever. Therefore, he had to win. This was what the Abbey Dean promised him, and he promised the Abbey Dean. Even now, even though he saw countless wild horses galloping over, he still did not lose confidence. To be more precise, other than his expression becoming a little ugly, his will was not affected in the slightest. General Lebu murmured, according to the news from Hautian Taoism, the Tengri heaven disappeared and the Central Plains people are looking for her. Could it be that we disobeyed her will and sent these horses to help the Tang? Chan Yu's eyes flashed with coldness. He stared at him and said coldly, "Stupid thing." Lebu did not dare to argue and left in silence. He thought he knew what Chan Yu was thinking. The upcoming field battle on the Guha grassland would be a decisive one. The Golden Tribe could not afford to lose, nor could they afford to retreat. Because the cavalry of the Golden Tribe had gone too far to the south and it was too far for them to return home. Since they could not admit defeat or retreat, they could only fight on. How could they waver the morale of the army at this moment? Lebu understood the reason, so he kept silent when he was scolded as stupid. This has nothing to do with morale. The Tang will never win. Why? What do the Tangs want, even if they shed blood and kowtow? Horses. Wrong. Chan Yu looked at the south with a cold and confident expression. What the Tangs want are not horses, but war horses. Yes. Although Situilan and Wang Wu thought every day that any kind of horse would be good as long as there were horses, in fact, only war horses were needed for the cavalry. War horses had to be trained for a long time. But now there was only a herd of wild horses on the grassland. Wild horses had never seen blood, never been to the battlefield, no saddle, no bridle. How could they ride them? How could they fight? No one could train tens of thousands of wild horses into war horses in such a short period of time. The morning had just arrived, and they were about to go to the battlefield. What else could those wild horses do except to watch? Hearing Chan Yu's words, General Lebu's face suddenly brightened. He was the general in charge of the cavalry of the royal palace. The reason why he did not think of this was that he was stunned by the scene of tens of thousands of horses galloping. The Golden Tribe royal court began to speed up the preparation for the charge. The war horses, which had been frightened by the wild horses, calmed down a little under the comfort of their masters. They began to put on their leather armors and quiver. However, when they looked at their companions in the south, they still looked a little uneasy and disorderly. But just as Chan Yu's cold and correct judgment, the Tang camp in the south was even more chaotic. The Tang army finally woke up from the ecstasy and tears. Hearing the news from the scouts in the distance, they started to prepare for the battle as fast as they could. But they found that the vanguard camp of the northern battlefront army did not have enough riding equipment. It had been 3 years without mounts. None of the soldiers in the northern battlefront army had thought of this problem beforehand. More troublesome things were yet to come. The Tang army found that although the wild horses were relatively friendly to them, they were extremely resistant to being reined in, let alone riding equipment. The Tang camp was full of wild horses galloping everywhere. Their mottled hair was flying everywhere. Some wild horses even knocked over the Tang army and ran away. Although they could not see what was going on in the Tang camp, they could hear the sounds of chaos and see the smoke and dust that represented chaos. The grassland cavalrymen, who already knew Chan Yu's wise judgment, whistled mockingly in the direction of the Tang camp and waved their machetes to show their contempt. Right at this moment, an extremely unpleasant howl resounded in the world. The sound was like 2 rough stones rubbing against each other, but it also sounded like a broken wind box, giving off a feeling of exhaustion. It also sounded like a patient gasping for breath, but it did not stop at all. The unpleasant neigh pierced through the sky and earth. The mockery of more than 100,000 grassland cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe royal court was forcibly suppressed. The indignant neigh and strange snorting noises of the wild horses in the Tang camp suddenly disappeared. Tens of thousands of wild horses seemed to have heard the most terrifying sound. They did not dare to move anymore. They all looked at the place where the neigh came from and raised their necks high, like soldiers waiting to be inspected. The dust in the northwest of the wilderness was about to completely settle down. Something seemed to be coming out from inside. There were 8 divine horses, rarely seen in the mortal world, and they were dragging a shabby carriage. A black donkey sat in the shabby chariot. Much of the donkey's fur had been peeled off, and it looked rather pitiful. However, its expression was one of contentment. Perhaps it was because it was born with a heroic spirit, or perhaps it was because it was eating grapes and drinking wine. The black donkey looked down at all the horses in the wilderness, wild horses and war horses, like a real king. The wild horses in the Tang camp lowered their heads. The war horses of the Golden Tribe royal court were frightened. Mu Yu and the 6th brother walked out of the camp and toward the broken chariot. At this time, they saw the big black horse dragging the black chariot behind the broken chariot. It looked happy and fat. It seemed that it had been living well with its elders for the past 3 years. Mu Yu smiled. Because the grassland was too dry, her lips cracked and some blood flowed out. She and the 6th brother saluted the black donkey in the chariot. The black donkey nodded reservedly and returned the salutation. The big black horse rushed to Mu Yu and lowered its head to snuggle in her arms. But it suddenly remembered the guy who only had one arm and forced itself to move away. Mu Yu touched its neck. The big black horse stepped back and bowed to her and the 6th brother. Then, the sound of wheels came from the Tang camp. Countless carriages came out of the supply camp and came to the vanguard camp. The carriages were filled with all kinds of riding equipment and sabers. The 4th brother, Fan Yu, was walking in the front. The disciples of the academy finally met in the wilderness. The saddle is on the horse's back, the reins are tightened, and the wild horse is calm. The cavalrymen of the northern battlefront army gently touched the mounts that they used to be familiar with. They sighed with emotion. Their mounts were getting old and left. Only these mounts were still the same. Although they were a bit old, they were still good. Holding the water, Wang Wu moved closer to his mount and fed it. Looking at this wild horse that was still a little restless, he silently thought in his heart, I will really be your slave for the rest of my life. Now, let's go kill the enemies. Yes, let's go kill the enemies. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court took the lead and attacked like a tide. The restless grassland warhorses, under the whipping of their masters and the pain of the spurs, burst out with courage and bravery. They forgot their instinctive fear and started to charge. The Tang army was much quieter than before. They did not get on their horses. They led the wild horses. No, from this moment on, they were warhorses. They stepped on the hard soil of the grassland and walked slowly but firmly to the north. They were the Tang army. The strongest cavalry in the world had always been invincible. The warhorses they led had been invincible in the swamp in the north of the West Wilderness for decades. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were strong, but they were nothing in front of them. Dust covered the sky above the grassland. Finally, it was time to get on the horses. Situilan rode on the brown wild horse and slowly drew out her cold saber from the sheath. She raised the blade and pointed at the grassland cavalryman. She was expressionless and did not speak. The bodyguard beside her suddenly roared angrily. All the Tang soldiers roared at the same time. Several years of depression, accompanied by this angry roar, turned into battle intent. Then it was a silent charge. It was suffocating and silent charge. Many cavalrymen of the northern battlefront army were not familiar with charging. However, when they raised their sabers and urged their horses to charge forward, the familiar feeling came back to them. It was a feeling of invincibility. Countless clouds of dust cut the grassland. Countless iron streams rushed toward the Golden Tribe. In a moment, the sound of killing shook the sky. In the direction of Qilian City. On the side of Guha. All the cavalrymen of the northern battlefront army rushed out of there. The black iron streams converged toward the Golden Tribe from 3 directions. If someone could see the grassland from the sky, he would be shocked speechless by this magnificent scene. The cold wind blew Situilan's hair on her cheeks. She thought, for victory. Wang Wu bit his lips, and his eyes were filled with determination. He thought, for the city of Wei. Under the flag of the Golden Tribe. Chanyu looked very pale. Lebu anxiously urged him to retreat and join the national master at the rear. Chanyu did not speak. No one knew what he was thinking. Until now, he finally understood why the national master did not agree with his decision to take the risk. The academy. Ning Ke was so cruel. The Golden Tribe lost. He knew it clearly. With a pft, he spat out a mouthful of blood, swayed, and fell off the horse. On the meadow of Guha. Ning Ke put down the binoculars and thought of what he had seen. He was silent. He handed the binoculars to General Su Qi. Su Qi looked at him and asked, "You have endured for so many years just for today? Don't you think it's risky?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "This is the only way." Su Qi said, "If you had given the horses to me earlier, we could still win. But we can't kill them all." After saying this, he walked down the meadow. Situilan wanted to win. Wang Wu wanted to win. So he wanted to kill them all. Therefore, from the very beginning, he wanted to kill them all. Please cast your monthly votes. Chapter 1087. What Ning Ke wanted to do had been decided a long time ago. It was just that he needed to think about how to do it thoroughly. So, this is my solution. I have worked hard to think and write about this plot seriously. I hope everyone will be satisfied. From the beginning, he only had one thing in mind, to kill them all. From the beginning, I only had one thing in mind, to serve all of you. Well, this is not pretentious, nor is it mushy, because I am also one of you. I will choose the solution and plot that I am more willing to see. Compared to the words, willing to see, other things will be relatively later, such as things like military ability. Well, I have never thought about it from the beginning. I am originally a military idiot, but it does not affect the things I write. I am very happy. I like this plot, and Ning Ke who is not liked by others. If you have the same opinion as me, please encourage and support me. Or, from the beginning, what I wanted to do was to solicit monthly votes. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Chapter 1088. The setting sun was as red as blood. Hua Eng, the vanguard general of the northern battlefront army of Tang, stood in the howling wind and looked at the fading dust. He finally relaxed and was supported by Situelan. Blood and corpses were everywhere in the field hundreds of miles away from Guha. The strong wind from the north had been blowing for a whole day, so the smell of blood was not so strong. But the world was still red. The preparation for the war started in the early morning and the cavalry started to fight before noon. They fought until dusk. Of course, the Tang army was the final winner. The cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court suffered heavy casualties. Chanyu was in a coma. Several high priests sent to the front line died in the melee. At the last moment, the young slave, Ada, was summoned back by the nation master. He escorted the badly wounded Lebu and retreated with the remaining soldiers. That was how he escaped the fate of being crushed by the cavalry. General Su Chi had prepared 700 black armored cavalrymen for this young slave. They had been waiting at the edge of the battlefield for this young slave to kill him when he brought up the rear. The Golden Tribe Royal Court retreated to the north. The Tang army started to chase after them and the Tang army started to clean up the battlefield. This was the fiercest battle in 1,000 years, so it naturally created the most tragic battlefield. Arms were cut off by padeos, bodies were disemboweled, pools of black blood were everywhere, annoying mosquitoes and flies were everywhere, and painful moans were everywhere. The medical team of the Tang army kept moving in the field. The cavalrymen carried stretchers with excellent horsemanship and sent the injured comrades to the barracks. The most seriously injured soldiers would be dragged back to the Guha military village by carts for further treatment. They were fighting against time to save as many people as possible. Apart from treating their comrades and collecting weapons and armors, there was another important task, which was to accept the surrender, collect the captives and the wounded soldiers who could no longer fight. Hundreds of Tang soldiers walked in the field with their horses, but strangely, they did not see any captives. A grassland barbarian was lying in the wild grass, staring at the gray sky with despair in his eyes. His slightly rising and falling chest showed that he was not dead yet. His pale face was covered with blood. A shadow fell on his face, followed by the blade of the knife. A cavalryman of the Golden Tribe was pinned down by the corpse of his mount. His lungs were pierced by his broken ribs. Blood kept spurting out from his lips. He could not die immediately and kept howling in pain. When he saw the Tang soldiers walking over with blood-stained padeos in their hands, he showed no fear or despair. Instead, he showed a joyful expression and shouted something in the language of the prairie, full of begging. The common soldiers of the northern battlefront army could understand the barbarian language, so the Tang soldiers understood it. They looked at each other and hesitated. At this moment, Wang Wui limped over. He raised his saber and killed the dying cavalryman of the Golden Tribe. He also cut off his head. A Tang soldier said, "We just don't want to give him a quick death. Whether he's in pain or not has nothing to do with us. I didn't chop off his head to show my benevolence. It's just that, there are still so many heads to chop off. I don't have time to wait for you. After saying that, Wang Wu led his warhorse and walked towards the meadow where there were even more corpses. Behind him, there was a cart full of grassland barbarians' heads. Wang Wu and his comrades did not want to give those wounded grassland barbarians a quick death. They did it not because of humanity, but because they needed those heads. They wanted the heads of the grassland barbarians, not because of the merit. It was purely because the general's mansion had issued an order that all the heads of the grassland barbarians must be chopped off and collected. As for taking captives, there were no captives on the battlefield today. Hua Ying's pale face showed a satisfied smile as he looked around the wilderness, the setting sun and the blood-red world. Then he coughed and his beard was splashed with blood. As the vanguard general, he had made the most contribution today. But he really did not care about it. And he knew that he did not need to care about it anymore. You should know why I've been suffering in the frontier all these years. Hua Ying's voice was a little intermittent. He seemed very tired, but his voice was clear and energetic. Situilan did not say anything. She helped him sit on the meadow. The Hua family was loyal to Liu. They had played a dishonorable role in the battle for the throne a few years ago. But they were suppressed by Ning Ke and the late empress. Hua Shanyu died and the Hua family quickly declined. They believed that after this battle, they would forget about the past. But it was hard for Huang to forget about the past. The Academy, or Mr. 13, is really a cold-hearted man. Looking at the tragic scene around him, he thought of the Hua family's miserable experience and the dozens of Gushan commandery soldiers who were sent to the frontline to die. He shook his head. If he had let the northern battlefront army take those wild horses in advance, or even if he had just told the general or me, I don't think so many people would have died in the past 3 years. Situilan did not say anything. As a student of the academy, a former friend and a current follower of Ning Ke, she did not agree with Huang. But she could not defend herself at this moment. Because the Tang army had paid too much for the lack of warhorses in the past 3 years. Too many people had died today. But I like it very much. Huang suddenly laughed. Full of admiration and emotion, he continued, the Golden Tribe is really powerful. His method should have the least casualties. But in the process, he had to be ruthless to the end. Only by doing so could he win the war with the least cost. I admire him and sympathize with him. It was complicated and even illogical, but Situilan understood it. Huang looked at the grassland in the distance under the twilight. He looked at the dust, the enemies who were running in panic, and the soldiers of the northern military camp who were not far behind. He finally closed his eyes. He still had a smile on his face, a satisfied smile. Defeating the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and watching the talented and bold Chanyu and the unfathomable nation master run away like dogs was undoubtedly the best thing for a future Tang general. He could finally rest in peace after seeing this scene. Situilan put her hand in front of his nose and paused for a long time. Finally, she let go of his hand and put the body on the meadow. She signaled the military doctor who had been waiting for him to handle the body. She stood up, still in the wind. Part of the flag of the Tang Empire was burnt in the fierce battle. It was black and ugly, but the golden thread inside was still dazzling in the twilight, as if it would last forever. She looked around with the broken flag and then to the north. The remaining forces of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were running north at full speed. The northern battlefront army had defeated the main force of the Royal Court, but it did not mean that they were completely wiped out. Huang did not remind her anything before he died. He did not tell her that she could not let Chanyu escape. He knew very well that the Golden Tribe Royal Court would not be able to survive this time. Because the grassland people had gone south to the Tainan. If the grassland people had stayed at the front line of the 7 stockade villages instead of attacking like wildfire, even if they were defeated, they would have a great chance to escape to the depths of the grassland, just like they had done hundreds of years ago. The grassland was so vast that it would be difficult to fight or find them in summer. By then, it would be difficult for the Tang army to wipe them out. But now the grassland people had gone too far south and even passed through the Xiangwan plain. How could they escape? Situilan did not think the grassland people could escape, and she would not allow them to do so. She looked at the messy dust in the north and said, "Take a rest and get ready to chase." It was noisy in the vanguard camp of the northern battlefront army. The smell of numbing powder was everywhere. In the iron furnace room on the east side, the sound of hitting weapons could be heard, but not many people were talking. After a whole day of bloody battle, the generals and soldiers were exhausted to the extreme. The Tang army also paid a terrible price. Even General Huaing died of blood loss and exhaustion. The atmosphere in the barracks was good, but it was quiet because they had regained hope in a desperate situation and then defeated the strong enemy. The flattest meadow behind the vanguard camp had been isolated. It was even quieter than the camp. Even the sound of the black donkey chewing grapes could be heard clearly. Fourth brother walked to the shabby sedan and pointed at his younger brother and younger sister. He introduced them to the black donkey. "They are sixth brother and seventh sister. I entered the school earlier than them, so I am the fourth." The black donkey was still very reserved. He nodded and said nothing. But he was thinking that it was lucky that they were not third or third brother. Otherwise, he would have to greet them first if he entered the school earlier. The big black horse shook his head and ran over excitedly. He looked around but did not see the familiar figure. He suddenly lowered his head and looked a little disappointed. "I don't know where youngest brother is," fourth brother explained. "In fact, no one knows where he is since he left Chang'an." The mysterious national master did not participate in this bloody battle. He helped Chanyu from the beginning and led the most elite and loyal Duoer cavalry to retreat to the north quickly. Perhaps it was because of this that Ning Kai did not participate in the battle. He did not appear after the battle. No one knew where he went. Just like the past spring, he disappeared again. The big black horse was a little disappointed. He walked to the top of the meadow and looked at the sun that was gradually being swallowed by the ground. He was silent. He knew that the sun was actually swallowed by the Black Sea in the north. The sun that never sets on the grassland was the emperor of the Desolate Man Empire. Then it was the great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine. Then it was Chanyu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Chanyu had always thought that he was the sun. Even if he set, he would still rise again tomorrow. But today he felt that it would be difficult for him to rise again. The most loyal Duoer cavalry escorted him to the city of Wei. General Lebu's injuries were stabilized and he recovered quickly with the help of the high priest. When the young slave Ada stood silently in front of his bed, he still had enough power and enough powerhouses. He still had the national master. But he still felt that he was struggling at the bottom of the cold sea and would suffocate at any time. Because he was very afraid. This chapter has been edited. Chapter 1089. The main cavalry of the royal court was defeated. Many tribes no longer followed his footsteps and scattered on the grassland. They would become the captives of the Tang cavalry, or even be taken advantage of by the horse gang. This scared him. Just a moment ago, he was about to become the ruler of the entire world, and in the next moment, he was shot in the cheeks by a hidden arrow on his way to the throne. Blood flowed out, and the blood was very ugly. No matter who it was hard for anyone to accept this fact. His confidence and ambition were crushed to the point where they couldn't be any more shattered. This scared him. What scared him the most was that when he saw tens of thousands of wild horses coming in the morning glow and those miraculous things happening in front of him, he realized that all these years of high spirits and the great ambition of riding horses to the Central Plains were actually a scam. This was the Academy's plot, and that person's plot. A few years ago, the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire made peace, and the Golden Tribe royal court benefited the most from it. Whether it was the cession of the Xiangwan Plain or the surrender of the warhorses, it was like putting a rope around the neck of the Tang Empire. Now it seemed that the Tang Empire was showing weakness, and tempted the royal court to take the risk of moving south. Ning Ke, Ning Ke, Ning Ke, he murmured this name many times, so many times that it went deep into his bones. He did not understand. This plot of the Academy was actually very risky. If there was a slight problem, the grassland cavalry could easily sweep the Central Plains. Then why did the Academy do this? What else was worth the risk of the Tang Empire other than the extinction of the Golden Tribe? When did the Academy become so cold-blooded? What kind of hatred did Mr. 13 have with him? Chanyu thought for a long time, and gradually calmed down. He was talented and bold. Even though he was defeated by the Tang outside Guha, and even saw the real picture of the abyss of destruction, he was still a big shot. How could he be reconciled? He calmed down again and decided to take a risk. Since the Tang Empire could set up a plot, endure for 3 years, and take the risk to achieve great achievements. Why couldn't he take the risk? Why couldn't he succeed? He believed that the Tingri heaven did not abandon him. Not long after, the respected elders of the tribe, Ada, General Buell, and the high priest who was the representative of the national master, all came to his room. They saw Chanyu's back facing the sand table in silence. The Chanyu pointed at an inconspicuous small city on the sand table and said calmly, "I know the Tang people and many people in the tribe think that the war is over and that the battle that day was the final battle, but I don't think so. This is the city of earth under our feet, and it is also the place I chose for the final battle." No one understood what he meant. The royal court was far from being a match for the Tang Empire. Even if they wanted to fight to the death, how could the other party give them the chance? In other words, what right did the royal court have? The Tang, or the Academy's goal is to destroy the tribe. They want to kill us all. Our goal now is to escape from the Tang's pursuit and return to our homeland. We don't have any provisions. There are some in the Chicheng stockade. I've already sent Su Yong to get them. Those rations aren't enough to support us back. Hundreds of thousands of people are naturally not enough, but if only 30,000 people go, it's still enough. The Tang people will always be following us. So we need a victory, a decisive victory that will throw the Tang people into chaos. Only then can we keep the last flame of the tribe. The Chanyu looked at the flat field on the sand table and the 7 cities above it. After a moment of silence, he said, "Su Chi wants to kill us all, so he can only gather his troops and push towards the north. The formation can't be too thick. If 10,000 Duoer cavalry break through the central line and attack the northern military camp, or even further south, do you think the Tang Empire will not be shaken? How will the Academy react?" General Buell said, "The main force of the Tang army will arrive tomorrow morning. Su Chi will not make such a mistake. The world's best general in defense, of course, will not make such a mistake. But that was in the past, just like how I would not make the mistake of charging with all my troops." The Chanyu shook his head and said, "I did not see through the Academy's plan. Su Chi has to follow the Academy's plan because the Academy wants all of us to die. He can only do so." The room was silent. Everyone felt that something was wrong. Chanyu's decision was not a risk, but a crazy gamble. No, it was not even a gamble. It was more like turning back and shouting helplessly before entering the abyss of despair. Even if Su Chi could really arrange the Tang army into the easiest line, even if the Duoer cavalry could really break through to the south, they could not change the whole situation. Ada's eyes lit up. He completely understood what Chanyu meant. Chanyu did not want to win at all. He only wanted to take 20,000 elite cavalries with him. Then he would lose the war and the Tang Empire would not get what they wanted. After they recuperated and Taoism stabilized the south, they might be able to win the whole world again. After a moment of silence, Buell said, "I'll go." No one argued with him. This was not about military exploits, nor was it about dying for the imperial court. It was a cold consideration of reality. Neither Ada nor the priests were able to command a large number of cavalries. The high priest said, "The nation master will accompany us to escort the Chanyu back." Ada did not say anything. He knew his role. When the Duoer cavalry broke through the defense line of the Tang army and entered the southern grassland or even the northern military camp to loot and kill, the Tang army would chase after the palace where Chanyu was at the fastest speed. The fastest speed required the shortest distance, and the shortest distance was a straight line. This seemed to be the theory from the academy. The palace would return from the city of Wei to the north, and the Tang would chase from there. What he had to do was to guard the only street in the city of Wei. Ada bowed to the Chanyu and turned to leave. He walked to the street, pushed open a dusty old shop and sat by the table. He did not leave again. The rest of the people left the room and started to prepare for the escape and the south. After the nation master knew the plan of the Chanyu, he naturally had to make corresponding arrangements. The house was empty. The Chanyu turned to the window and looked at the bright moon in the night sky. He seemed to have gained some kind of strength from the warm and loving light. After the city of Wei was slaughtered, most of the houses were uninhabitable. The grassland people were used to living in tents outside the city. The place he stayed in today was a relatively secluded courtyard. He did not know who this courtyard used to belong to. He did not know who used to belong to the city of Wei. So he did not know why that person wanted to kill him. If he knew that Tingri had lived here for many years, maybe he would think differently. The battle that took place on the grassland outside Guha was the most spectacular and tragic cavalry battle in 1,000 years since the Tang defeated the Desolate Man. The number of cavalrymen from the Golden Tribe Royal Court who participated in this battle was more than that of the Tang army. Besides, the Tang cavalry had hardly received any cavalry training over the years. Logically speaking, the royal court had the upper hand, but the Tang army won in the end. Especially before the northern battlefront army's ambush, the cavalry of the vanguard battalion managed to block the royal court's cavalrymen. That was because the Tang army had more strength than the royal court's cavalrymen. That was the spirit of valiance. The Tang army had this spirit, and so did the wild horses they rode. In the spring wind of the grassland, the Tang army waved their padeos and silently hacked their enemies to death one after another. Those wild horses trampled on the wildflowers and grass and galloped recklessly. They even imitated the Tang army and humiliated the grassland horses of the palace. The Battle of Guha was destined to be recorded in the magnificent picture of history. In hindsight, this cavalry battle might not be the decisive battle of the whole world, but it was definitely the most important one. After winning the war, even if the Golden Tribe Royal Court still had the power to fight, they would not be able to pose any threat to the foundation of the Tang Empire. To put it more directly, even if the Golden Tribe Royal Court exerted all their power after that day, they would not be able to destroy the Tang Empire. For the whole world, what was more important was that the Tang Empire had solved the big problem in the north for many years. Now the emperor and ministers in Chang'an could focus all their energy and resources on the south. If they could stabilize the situation before Taoism solved the internal dispute, Peach Mountain would face unimaginable pressure. A few days later, Situilan led the cavalry of the vanguard battalion to the front line of the 7 stockade villages. At this time, she and all the Tang army had already won, but they wanted a bigger victory. During this time, the bodyguards of the northern military camp and a unit of the Western Expedition Army that was quietly transferred here from the Pamir Mountains half a year ago had bitten the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court like wolves at the cost of heavy sacrifices. They would not let go even if they were bleeding all over. The cavalry of the royal court, who had always been known for their flexibility, was forced to slow down their retreat to the north. They had just entered the front line of the 7 stockade villages yesterday and were caught up by the main force of the Tang army. Under such circumstances, the grassland cavalry that had retreated to the 7 stockade villages did not dare to leave the villages and march to the grassland. It was tantamount to leaving their backs to the terrible Tang people. Even the Duoer cavalry that had set up camp in the city of Wei did not dare to do so. It would inevitably mean destruction. The remaining 100,000 or so grassland cavalry set up camp in the 7 stockade villages in an attempt to temporarily stabilize the situation. After a stalemate, they would find time to escape the pursuit of the Tang army and escape into the depths of the grassland. However, those tribes that were still hoping for a fluke did not know that Chanyu had made a cold-blooded and only correct decision. He would use these tribal cavalry to attract the main force of the Tang army and try to thin the formation of the Tang army. Then he would send 10,000 elite Duoer cavalry to the south unexpectedly. This arrangement would cost the lives of more than 100,000 grassland cavalry. If everything went well, it could be exchanged for 20,000 Duoer cavalry and bigwigs like Chanyu to escape into the depths of the grassland. This exchange was cruel and seemed to be a loss, but it had to be done. Now that the Tang army had warhorses, it would not be easy for the palace cavalry to retreat to the grassland. Especially now that the Tang army had obviously gone mad and were more terrifying than the grassland people, like a pack of wolves. If the Tang army focused on chasing them, the palace cavalry would not dare to turn back and intercept them. They would be completely annihilated in less than 300 miles. When Chanyu was making his final preparations, the Tang army surrounded the 7 stockade villages. It was not accurate to say that they were surrounded, because the grassland in the north seemed to be endless and they could enter at any time. That was the path of survival that the Tang army left for the palace cavalry, but also the path of death. The main force of the northern battlefront army and the tribe's cavalry in the 7 stockade villages formed a stalemate. But the stalemate did not last long. Without any warning, the battle between the two sides began fiercely again. It seemed to be endless killing, and the lives of the soldiers from both sides were being taken away. There was chaos everywhere. 3 days later, the royal flag fluttered in the wind and dust filled the sky. The Tang Central Military Tent had arrived at the south of the city of Wei. Su Qi, the Tang's defender general of the state, had finally arrived at the front line. He was not late. As long as he could see the Golden Tribe being annihilated before the end of the war, he would not be considered late. Surprisingly, neither Su Qi nor Chanyu in the city of Wei gave any direct orders for the bloody battle on the hundreds of miles in the north of the continent. They just silently watched the cavalry charge and die, and then went to Kaiping and other stockade villages to replenish their forces. The war was a war between nations. It could not be finished in a day. Before the war was over, there was no time to rest. Only when one side died could they live. That was the truth. Therefore, Su Qi and Chanyu did not care. They just sent their men to the battlefield and let them kill or be killed by the enemy. For the Tang army, they had already won, so they wanted to kill as many of the enemy's forces as possible. Since they were going to annihilate the entire nation, that was the truth. A few simple sentences were far from enough to describe the bloody battle on the front line of the 7 stockade villages. It was not enough to describe the pressure faced by the remaining soldiers of the Golden Tribe royal court and the sacrifices made by the Tang army. People only needed to remember that in just a few days of siege, the number of people who died had almost exceeded the number in the Guha plain that day. Different from Kaiping, Chu City and other stockade villages, the city of Wei, which was supposed to be the main battlefield, was very quiet. There were no bloody scenes of cavalry charging and killing, not even the sound of hooves. The Golden Tribe Royal Court was here, and so was the central military tent of the Tang army. But the battle seemed far away. Su Qi looked at the dusty city through the binoculars. He frowned and remained silent. The only ones who can fight are the 30,000 Duoer cavalry. A staff officer said confusedly. According to calculations, there are at least 10,000 Duoer cavalry around the city of Wei. Is Chanyu really going to defend the city? The city of Wei was the smallest city among the 7 stockade villages. Not to mention that the grassland people were not good at defending cities, this small city could not accommodate 20,000 cavalrymen. Now the Duoer cavalry had set up camp in the grassland north of the city, but they did not retreat before the Tang army arrived. Were they going to fight to the death here? Su Qi looked at the city and suddenly said, "They are going south again." When the officers in the central tent heard this, they all raised their heads in shock. After such a painful defeat, would the grassland people still dare to go south? Even if the Duoer cavalry broke through the defense line and entered Xiangwan Plain, what could they do? Would they still dare to go to Chang'an? Suddenly, someone realized the problem. The defense of the central military tent is too weak. We should ask General Situ to help immediately. A staff officer said anxiously, otherwise, if the Duoer cavalry really broke through, the safety of the central military tent will be a big problem. Most importantly, once the situation becomes chaotic, Chanyu might really escape. There is no need to do those unnecessary things. Su Qi looked at the city and thought of the man's promise. He said, "Where do you think the Duoer cavalry will attack from? Going around the city will consume too much of the horses' energy, and they will be easily killed by our crossbows. If I were Chanyu, I would definitely choose to go through the city if I really wanted to go south to create chaos." Su Qi did not say anything more. He turned around and walked to the back of the tent, ready to take a nap. He had not slept for several days and nights, so he was really tired. As for Chanyu's foresight, decision and courage, since he had already seen through it, there was nothing to worry about. Because someone had promised that nothing would go wrong. Su Qi slept soundly that night. When he woke up, the sky was still dark. It was the darkest time before dawn. He washed up and drank a bowl of mare's milk. Then he put on his armor and led his horse to the higher meadow beside the camp. He took off the telescope from the saddle and looked at the city again. At dawn, the world was quiet. The gates of the city were closed, and there was no light inside. It was like a ghost town. But Su Qi knew that Chanyu's strongest cavalry would soon rush out from that gate. He appeared calm in front of his soldiers, but he was actually a little worried. Otherwise, he would not have come early in the morning to observe the enemy and confirm the time of the enemy's attack. The main force of the Northern Battlefront Army had been transferred to Kaiping, Chu City and other battlefields. The central military tent was facing the main tent of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. When the 10,000 Duoer cavalry rushed through the city, how could they resist? Su Qi had always thought that he could trust that person completely. But looking at the silent city before dawn, he still felt a little uneasy. The city was not high. The watchtower on the gate was only 3 feet away from the ground. When dawn came, people with better eyesight could even see the stubborn weeds in the yellow soil. When Su Qi was looking at the city, someone was also looking at him from the city. The national master of the Golden Tribe looked at the tents of the Tang army on the meadow in the distance. He looked at the warhorses eating grass with their heads lowered. His old face still did not regain its calmness after seeing the military intelligence reported by the palace cavalry. The Tang central military tent was very quiet. Thinking of the tragic scenes in the other cities and the royal court cavalry struggle, he knew that Su Qi had already guessed Chan Yu's intention. But why was he so cooperative? The national master did not want to calculate the success rate of Chan Yu's risky strategy. Since the royal court had been forced to the abyss by the Tangs, they had to put up a struggle. They could not fall so easily. The last choice was the best choice, wasn't it? Yes, he knew it was from the academy. Su Qi's confidence probably came from the academy. Since the beginning of the war, the academy had not really made a move. The real powerhouses had not made a move yet. In the quiet dawn, the national master looked at the sky, waiting for someone to come. Chapter 1090. The national master looked at the sky because he knew someone would jump down from the sky soon. The powerhouses of the academy would not care about the Duoer cavalry who were attacking from the south because there were too many of them. Except for Jun Mo before he lost his arm, no one could stop them. One man holding the pass against tens of thousands of cavalry. This had not happened many times in history. It had nothing to do with cultivation state and strength. It was related to an indescribable aura. Even if Yu Lian and Tang appeared in the south of the city of Wei, they would not be able to do it. Or in other words, both of them would not do it. In this case, the academy would not care about the Duoer cavalry. On the contrary, the academy would take the chance to kill the national master and dozens of high priests when the royal court was desperate. As for Ada and General Buell, they would definitely be the targets of the academy, and this would be the perfect opportunity for the royal court. On a dangerous battlefield, in front of a hopeless abyss, everything that seemed like an opportunity could actually be a trap. No one could completely figure out the hidden information, unless Haotian returned to the human world. In that case, the two sides would only be competing on determination, willpower, speed, and luck. He was very clear that if the Duoer cavalry could defeat the northern battlefront army where Su Qi was before the academy succeeded, then the battle around the city of Wei would come to a conclusion. Even if the powerhouses of the academy came together and defeated the powerhouses of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, they would not be able to achieve their original goal. The extermination of the Duoer cavalry would become a joke. That was the goal of Chan Yu and the national master. No matter how he looked at it, the Golden Tribe Royal Court had a chance to escape this morning. The national master thought silently. At this moment, the darkness finally could not stand the torture of time. It gradually thinned and a faint light shone from behind. Although the sun had not risen from the grassland, it was already morning. The morning light shone on the national master's old face. It was like a clear stream flowing into a cracked field. After a moment of nourishment, it was sucked dry and could no longer be seen. The crack in the field seemed to be unfathomable. It was said that the 23-year cicada Yu Lian and the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill were the two most mysterious people in the cultivation world. In fact, the nation master was just as mysterious. No one knew how old he was, or who his master was. But it was obvious that he was not good at the methods that the grassland barbarian priests were best at. His cultivation seemed to be a combination of the ideas of many sects, but it did not belong to any sect of Buddhism or diabolism. It was hard to describe. In fact, even the nation master himself sometimes did not understand what kind of dharma he had been cultivating throughout his long life. Because he grew up with the high priest of the grassland. He was not the high priest of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, but the high priest of the right Royal Court. Therefore, he had been learning Buddhism from the very beginning. When he came to the Golden Tribe Royal Court, he met Xiong Chumo, who was severely injured by Yu Lian, or Lin Wu, the Grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine at that time. He saved Xiong Chumo's life. To show his gratitude, Xiong Chumo taught him the secret divine skills of the divine halls of West Hill. He even traveled to Chang'an. Buddhism, Taoism, and witchcraft were all his cultivation. In terms of knowledge, he could definitely be ranked among the top 5 in the world. He had mastered 3 paths, so his state was naturally unfathomable. However, he still wanted to figure out what he wanted to cultivate in the end. Especially after taking the former Chanyu as his disciple and becoming the national master of the Golden Tribe, this desire grew stronger. He knew where this desire came from. It was the sense of belonging, or root, that everyone wanted to find. It was not until many years ago that he felt the great will of Haotian. He felt that his body and soul had been washed by snow water and became abnormally clean. He finally understood that it was not important what kind of dharma he practiced. His sense of belonging had nothing to do with his sect or sect. It was only related to his faith. As long as the faith was right, so what if he cultivated evil? As long as the goal was right, so what if he practiced evil? Perhaps it was because he understood this that his state became more and more unfathomable. No one knew how far he had gone. During the right to light in the Peach Mountain, he did not really fight. That was because Ning Ke used Haotian to control the world. He was too powerful, and he did not want the world to know. Because of his faith, he had to defeat the academy. Even though he had a high state, he still had to spend a lot of effort and preparation to defeat those unimaginable people in the academy. When Yu Lian disappeared from the eastern wilderness, he knew that the day was coming. He had prepared calmly for 3 years. Those carriages that were quietly parked by the mud walls of the city of Wei had also been waiting for 3 years. Even if it did not work, he had a way to trap those too. In this story of the city of Wei, apart from the waiting and forbearance of the national master and the powerhouses of the grassland and the academy, there was another important thing: whether the Duoer cavalry could break through the central military camp of the Tang army. In the morning light, it was quiet inside and outside the city. It seemed that everyone was sleeping, but in fact, no one was sleeping. Countless pairs of eyes were staring at the city gate with vigilance. With a very low squeak, the city gate of the city of Wei slowly opened from the inside. Many tiny dust particles came out from the gap of the double plywood door and sprinkled like pearls in the morning light. A sharp warning suddenly pierced the silent sky and spread in all directions. The Tang army's camp in the south of the city suddenly came to life. The Tang army, who had been prepared for a long time, carried all kinds of military equipment and were busy preparing. The final battle between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court had begun as usual. The city gate slowly opened and a grassland cavalryman slowly walked out. Both the cavalryman and the warhorse were covered in tough leather armor. Only their eyes were exposed, and they were indifferent and proud. The grassland cavalryman held a long machete in his hand and wore a white cloak around his neck. The cloak fluttered in the morning wind, looking like white clouds in the blue sky. Because their cloaks were like white clouds, they were called the Duoer cavalry. The Duoer cavalry was the source of their pride. They were the strongest and most loyal cavalrymen of the Golden Palace Chanyu, and the most terrifying existence on the grassland. In the past hundreds of years, even the richest Golden Palace could only support 6,000 Duoer cavalry at most. It was these 6,000 Duoer cavalry that were the biggest deterrent to the Tang cavalry. With the official rise of the Golden Palace, especially with the continuous secret support from the Central Plains under the leadership of Taoism, Chanyu now had a total of 36,000 Duoer cavalry. In the cavalry battle outside Guha, it was the Duoer cavalry who joined the battle at the end. They sacrificed all their men to stabilize the situation and prevent the Golden Palace from collapsing. For this, the bodies of 6,000 cavalrymen were still rotting on the grassland in the spring wind. After retreating north to the 7 stockade villages, Chanyu ordered 20,000 Duoer cavalry to reinforce Kaiping and Chu City to attract the main force of the Tang cavalry. He only left the most elite and powerful 10,000 cavalrymen in the city of Wei. 10,000 cavalrymen was not a small number. As far as the eye could see, it must be a dark mass that could cover a large area of the grassland. But now the Tang army could not see 10,000 cavalrymen, only one. They could only see the grassland cavalryman at the gate of the city of Wei, his cloak flying in the morning wind. The grassland cavalryman lifted the reins with his left hand and lightly hit the warhorse's belly with his boot heel. The warhorse slowly moved forward. Tap, 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 tap. The hoofbeats were slow and clear. The grassland cavalryman kicked the horse's belly again. The warhorse slowly sped up. Tap, 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 tap. At this time, they were already 20 feet away from the gate. The grassland cavalryman kicked the horse's belly again. The warhorse sped up again. Tap, 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 tap. One horse charged towards the Tang camp. A lone rider charging into the camp. The grassland cavalryman knew he would die, but he did not care. Inside the gate of the city of Wei, a black wall vaguely appeared. The black wall was moving forward. Another white wall appeared. The black wall was the cavalryman and the warhorse. The white wall was the white cloak worn by the cavalryman. It was the Duoer cavalry in a row. Black and white mixed together to form waves, snow-born in the sea of ink. Countless Duoer cavalry were ready to charge with the brave cavalrymen. In the city of Wei, the hoofbeats had yet to be heard, but they were about to be heard. If it was thunder, it must be muffled thunder. If it was a drum, it must be a huge drum. The grassland cavalryman who first left the city had already arrived at the meadow. The indifference in his eyes, which was not covered by his leather armor, had been replaced by fanaticism and brutality. He raised the bloodthirsty machete in his hand and was ready to really speed up. The next moment, 10,000 grassland cavalrymen would follow him and charge towards the Tang camp. At that time, 10,000 white clouds would bloom on the grassland. The hoofbeats grew louder and louder. Who could stop them? Su Qi, the Tang's defender general of the state, was in the central military tent. There were 6,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 well-trained infantrymen. Logically speaking, there should not be much to worry about. But the commander's tent had chased them through the night, and there were many supplies that had not arrived yet. Most importantly, there were many engineers and civilian workers who were still on the way. It was very difficult for the hastily laid fortifications to be as sturdy as before. At this moment, if the Duoer cavalry, who were feared by the horse gang on the grassland, charged over, everyone in the central military tent would be in big trouble. When the gate of Wei opened and the grassland cavalrymen appeared, everyone in the central military tent looked at Su Qi. They were not panicking, but rather anxious. They were not panicking because Su Qi was the best military genius in the world. Otherwise, how could he use the northern battlefront army to block the Golden Tribe royal court outside the 7 stockade villages for more than 10 years? But they were still anxious because the Golden Tribe royal court was obviously going all out today. If they were not careful and let the Duoer cavalry gain the upper hand, it would be terrible. The only cavalry that the Tang army could win against the Duoer cavalry was the black armored cavalry. But most of them were in the south to defend against the papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill. Thousands of black armored cavalry from the northern military camp had been sent to Kaiping by Su Qi 2 days ago to help Situilan clear the grassland forces there. How could they stop the Duoer cavalry? The grassland cavalryman was speeding up, and the hoofbeats became coherent. The cavalrymen at the gate of Wei, like a black sea in white waves, had not started charging. They were waiting to do so. The grassland cavalryman and his horse drew a straight line on the field under the morning light. It was a line ridden with courage and courage. The tens of thousands of Duoer cavalry behind him would follow the line he drew with his life. They would charge fiercely and fearlessly. That was the rhythm the Golden Tribe royal court wanted. It was the rhythm of a bloody battle to the end, a rhythm of blood flowing like a river. It would start as gentle as a drizzle, and then as terrifying as a storm. It was continuous and unstoppable. If the grassland cavalrymen entered that rhythm, the Tang army would be in danger. By then, it would be meaningless even if they killed the first Duoer cavalry. But now it seemed that there was no better way to break the rhythm. The city of Wei was far away from the Tang army. Even the best archer could not kill the grassland cavalrymen in advance. As for the most powerful defensive weapon of the Tang army, the crossbow battalion based on arrays, their shooting range was far from enough. So they could only prepare for the frontal charge of the tens of thousands of Duoer cavalry. People looked at Su Qi, waiting for his orders. The most important thing to do now was to move the crossbow battalions from the east and west sides to the center of the army. Once the crossbow battalions were moved, the grassland cavalrymen might attack from both sides of the city wall. But the most important thing now was to guard the center. Su Qi did nothing. He just looked at the dusty city in the north under the morning light, and listened to the louder and louder hoofbeats without any expression on his face. General. Marshal. People in the tent looked at him anxiously. They did not understand why he was so silent. Did the general have a brilliant plan? Or was the general worried about the two flanks and decided to defend to the death? Su Qi ignored his subordinates' puzzled, anxious, and even slightly angry gazes. He just quietly looked at the plains in the north, at the Duoer cavalry that was getting closer and closer. The hoofbeats were monotonous as they charged into the camp alone. It was quiet between heaven and earth. The field between the city of Wei and the Tang camp seemed to have lost all color. The green grass turned gray and the morning light dimmed, forming a very flat and dark background screen. The brave grassland cavalryman was the only existence in it. The grassland cavalryman was already more than 100 feet away from the city of Wei. The monotonous hoofbeats became clearer and clearer, like drumbeats beating on the field. The gray grass fell to the ground and the morning light became distorted. The whole world seemed to be shaking. After a while, 10,000 of the most elite grassland cavalrymen would charge out of the city. At that time, the drumbeats would shake heaven and earth and the world would be restless. Who could stop all this? Who could break the rhythm of the Duoer cavalry? The city of Wei was silent. Heaven and earth were silent. Suddenly the wind blew. The grassland cavalryman fell down. The grassland cavalryman who was charging alone, bravely, resolutely, and silently fell down in the beautiful morning light. A very thin stream of blood splashed in the air. It was abnormally clear under the morning light. The world regained its original color. The dim and cold light became warm again. Death was coming, but it warmed up. Or maybe it was because they finally saw hot blood. The grassland cavalryman fell down from the horse and his body fell heavily on the field. The saddle of the Duoer cavalry was specially made. It did not tie the horse's feet. The horse continued to charge forward for more than 100 feet before it felt something strange and slowly stopped. It looked back at its master who fell on the field and slightly raised its head. It was a little confused and did not know what had happened. The cavalryman lay on the field in front of the city gate. He did not move, did not struggle, and did not cry out in pain. Because he was no longer breathing. He didn't make any sound, and he didn't leave any last words that were as magnificent as mountains and rivers. He knew he was going to die, but he did not expect that he would die so quietly and so insignificant. The Duoer cavalry and the horse were covered with tough leather armor. Only their eyes were exposed. He opened his eyes and looked at the sky which was getting bluer. His vitality had disappeared and only blood was flowing. There was a wooden arrow stuck in his eye. It was a very ordinary wooden arrow. No one knew where the arrow came from. In the quiet field, there was the morning light, the wind, the grass, but no one. I still think I wrote it well. Chapter 1091. In front of the city of Wei, there was a lonely horse and a lonely corpse in the field. Just like the confused warhorse, the people in the city of Wei and the Tang camp did not know what happened. Where did the arrow come from? There was a deathly silence in the wilderness. It was absolute silence. Everyone was stunned. After some time, the hoofbeats sounded again. Another grassland cavalryman set off from the city gate and slowly rode towards the Tang camp in the south. Everyone stared at this cavalryman, knowing that he would die in the next moment. The commander of the Duoer cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court obviously wanted this cavalryman to die so that he could find out where the arrow came from. There was a soft hum, and there was a slight breeze in the morning light. The cavalryman's cloak fluttered in the wind and dissipated before he could turn into a cloud. Just like his life. Another ordinary arrow pierced deeply into his eye socket, causing a spray of blood to spurt out. When this cavalryman was shot to death, he was only a few dozen feet away from the city of Wei. The hoofbeats sounded again and several grassland cavalrymen rushed out of the city of Wei. The cavalrymen kept waving their leather whips, leaving bloody marks on the warhorses' buttocks. Their shouts broke the silence in front of the city gate. They were unafraid of death. At this speed, even the best warhorse could not last long. It was not enough to support these cavalrymen from the city of Wei to the Tang camp in the south. But obviously, they did not care. This time, the grassland people did not care about the rhythm, nor did they care about using time and speed to accumulate momentum. From the beginning, they rode at the fastest speed. They just wanted to rush out of the city gate. They could not let the arrow that came from nowhere destroy the momentum of the Duoer cavalry. They could not let the arrow break the rhythm of the Duoer cavalry. They had to prove something. Even if they would be shot to death soon after they got out of the city gate, it would at least prove that the mysterious and powerful archer could not do anything more unimaginable and could not stop all the cavalrymen. But what happened next was really unimaginable. The morning breeze blew gently, and the white cloaks spread out like clouds. There were 3 soft swishing sounds, and then the clouds suddenly disappeared, and blood suddenly appeared. The 3 grassland cavalrymen still didn't even make a sound before they fell from their horses to the ground. Their eye sockets were pierced by arrows, and the liquid in their eyeballs mixed with blood flowed down. The 3 arrows were still the standard arrows most commonly used by the Tang army. What was even more shocking and frightening was that when these 3 Duoer cavalry were killed, they were closer to the gates than the second Duoer cavalry. More accurately, when they charged out of the gates, they were killed by the arrows. That arrow, where did it come from? Still, no one could see where the arrow came from. Because the arrow was too fast. How could an ordinary arrow be shot so far? How could he shoot so fast? Speed and distance depended on the bow and the archer's strength, but what about accuracy? The Duoer cavalry was fully armored, with only their eyes exposed. Moreover, they were galloping at high speeds, which made it even harder to hit them. Yet, that person was able to hit them from such a distance. Who on earth was that archer? From the north to the south of the grassland, the Golden Palace, the Northern Battlefront Army, and the horse gang by the Shubi Lake, there were countless geniuses who were good at riding and shooting. Yet, none of them could do it. The entire city of Wei fell into absolute silence again. Some people had vaguely guessed where the arrow came from. Not where it came from, but who it came from. For example, the nation master, Lebu, and Ada. To be able to kill elite cavalrymen with wooden arrows over such a long distance, he must have unimaginable strength. He must be one of the most powerful cultivators in the world. When people talked about a truly powerful archer, they would usually think of General Xiaofan. After Xiaofan was killed, there was only one person left, and that was the one who killed Xiaofan. Not everyone could not see where the arrow came from. At least, the Tang soldiers around the place where the arrow came from could see it clearly. In an inconspicuous fort in the far north of the Tang camp, there was a fence that was built last night. There was someone standing behind the fence, and something that looked like a short fence. A dozen Tang soldiers looked at that person, too shocked to speak. They did not know what to do at this moment. Only then did someone wake up and hurried to report to his superior. That person was wearing an ordinary Tang uniform, just like any other Tang soldier. He held an unusual iron bow in his hand. The body of the bow was dark, with complicated talisman lines engraved on it. The iron bow seemed to have some kind of magic power. The short fence next to the person was not a real fence, but a dense array of arrows. At least 1,000 arrows were stuck tightly in the soil, squeezed together, and looked like a fence. Hoofbeats sounded again in the city of Wei. No one knew how many Duoer cavalry were trying to rush out of the city gate. That person took out an arrow from the forest of arrows beside him, placed it on the string, and pulled the bow in silence. When the iron bow was half drawn, he loosened his fingers, and the string returned to its original position. With a swoosh, the arrow flew away. A muffled groan came from the city of Wei in the distance, followed by the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. At this moment, that person had already taken out a second arrow from the ground, and repeated the previous action. Another muffled groan and the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground came from the city of Wei's gate. Another cavalry was shot down. All the trained Tang soldiers knew that shooting an arrow was actually a breakdown of several actions, starting from the pulling of the arrow and ending with the release of the string. The people watching from the side in shock did not think that there was anything special about that person's action. It was even simpler and more mechanical than the archery actions commonly seen in the Tang camp. Because it was simple and mechanical, it was not tall and straight, not to mention elegant. But that person's arrow was fast, so fast that it was beyond the scope of human imagination. In the direction of the city of Wei, the Duoer cavalry's charge was no longer as slow as before. But that person did not act like in some legends. From the first arrow to the sixth arrow, the surrounding Tang soldiers did not blink. It was not because they were too shocked to blink, but because they did not have time to blink. In the blink of an eye, 6 arrows pierced through the air. Logically speaking, these Tang soldiers should not have been able to see the archer's movements. But they could, because the archer's movements were so accurate and steady that it was hard to imagine. There was no change in the repetitive movements. His fingers were always in the same position on the bowstring. Even the sleeves on his forearms did not tremble. The 6 repeated actions were the overlapping shadows in the morning wind. When combined together, it could be seen clearly. But there were shadows. More arrows left the ground, were placed on the bowstrings, and pierced through the air. The grassland cavalry that rushed out of the city fell to the ground, and then smashed into the ground, creating small blossoms of blood. The cavalry did not stop charging, and the arrows did not stop shooting, not stopping at all. In the end, the cavalry charged out of the city gate so fast that even that person could not aim. So he stopped aiming, and just shot with his elbows and wrists. The sharp arrows crossed a long distance and came to the front of the city of Wei. They fell on the grassland cavalry, the warhorses, and the tough leather armor. But they broke through the armor. The moment the arrows touched the surface of the leather armor, they had completed their mission. The shafts were twisted into pieces by the huge force, but they still pushed the sharp arrowheads to their final destination. That was deep inside the flesh of the cavalry or their mounts. Looking at the figure of that person behind the fence, the Tang soldiers' eyes became more and more respectful. Everything that happened was so unbelievable. How terrifying the power of those arrows were. What was that person's body made of? How could he shoot so many powerful arrows in a row? Even the martial arts masters in the army had to rest after shooting dozens of arrows. Otherwise, their muscles would definitely be seriously injured. But that man had already shot more than 100 arrows, but his expression did not change. His body was as still as a mountain. Not to mention that his breathing had become rapid, even his chest did not seem to rise or fall. Suddenly, urgent bugles sounded around the Tang camp. Hundreds of Duoer cavalry went around the city wall, and tried to occupy the higher ground of the meadow, and then charged towards the Tang camp. But that person ignored them, and only stared at the city gate. The Duoer cavalry that was hiding in the city finally grasped the rhythm of the arrows. They found an opportunity, and opened the city gate completely. Then, dozens of cavalry that were the best at riding rushed out at the same time. Dozens of Duoer cavalry rushed out of the city gate, like countless clouds of fog rushing out of the gate between two mountains. At this moment, no matter how amazing that person's archery was, he could not kill dozens of cavalry at the same time, not to mention that there were hundreds or even thousands of cavalry behind him waiting to continue the charge. The Tang camp's shouts became more and more urgent, and 6,000 cavalry mounted their horses, ready to counterattack. If the mysterious and terrifying arrows could not protect the front of the central military camp, then they could only rely on the cavalry themselves. But that person did not give the Tang cavalry a chance to fight. He continued shooting arrows in silence. Facing the grassland cavalry that rushed out of the city gate like a cloud of fog, he shot an arrow. He only shot one arrow. Unlike before, this arrow was not pulled out from the grass beside him, but from the quiver on his back. That arrow was obviously different. The arrowhead was a round cylinder. A shrill whistle sounded in the morning sky. Under everyone's gaze, the arrow flew in an arc, and landed in front of the city of Wei. There was a moment of silence. Then, boom! A loud bang sounded in front of the city of Wei, raising a lot of soil, as if it was going to tear open the sky. Among the flying soil, there were the broken limbs of horses and cavalrymen, and even some heads flying in the air. The city of Wei's gate collapsed, the soil and bricks in the soil rustled down, crushing countless injured Duoer cavalry. Muffled groans and cries of pain could be faintly heard in the dust. Another arrow came from the south. This time, the sound of the arrow was clearer than before, not like a breeze, but like a hurricane, whistling mournfully. The whistling of the arrow sounded continuously. Hundreds of arrows, as if there was no break, passed through the morning wind, passed through the dust, and shot into the depths. A grassland cavalry jumped off his dead horse, pulled out his scimitar, and looked around anxiously, but did not know where the enemy was. Suddenly, an arrow came from the south, and pierced through his chest. A grassland cavalryman crawled up with blood all over his body and walked out of the smoke and dust. He kept shouting something, appearing particularly ruthless. Suddenly, an arrow was shot into his mouth and came out from the back of his head, bringing with it a flower of blood. A grassland cavalry fell to the ground, waved his scimitar, and killed his horse, which was still kicking after being shot. He struggled to stand up, eyes full of fear, and then he saw an arrow flying towards his fear. Puff, 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 puff. The arrow hit the leather armor, the eyes, the throat, and other different places, but made a very similar sound, which was the sound of something piercing. Those arrows seemed to have magic power, and could pierce through everything. In the dust in front of the city of Wei, there were deaths everywhere. The sound of arrows and muffled groans, which represented death, rang incessantly. After an unknown period of time, the dust finally settled, and the morning sun fell again, falling in front of the city of Wei, plated with a layer of red light. The morning sun finally peeked out of the grassland, red as if it was stained with blood. The morning sun was like blood, and the front of the city was covered in blood. At this time, the people inside and outside the city had already confirmed where the arrows came from. Everyone looked at the Tang camp, at the fence. Until now, not a single grassland cavalry could rush to the Tang camp. In fact, except for the first 3 cavalrymen, no one could rush out of the city of Wei. It was a mess in front of the city of Wei, with the corpses of the cavalrymen and warhorses piled up into a small hill. Fresh blood flowed down from the small mountain like countless tiny waterfalls. Back then, in front of the verdant canyon, Jun Mo blocked with his sword, and no one could pass. After Jun Mo lost his arm, no one thought that such a scene would appear again. Who would have thought that the scene in the city of Wei would appear again today, but in reverse? Today, with 1 arrow in the south, no one could come out. That person, with an iron bow and a ground full of arrows, had sealed the Golden Tribe Royal Court's most powerful cavalry in the city of Wei. At the same time the explosion occurred at the city gates, the hundreds of duo cavalry that were charging towards the Tang camp from both sides also suffered a crushing blow. The crossbow battalion that had been hiding at the side all this while, released their long-prepared rage and concentrated crossbow arrows at the same time. There was a buzzing sound on the grassland. It was the sound of zither, as if countless zither were playing the same tune. After a while, when the sound disappeared, tens of thousands of crossbow arrows fell at the same time, like a rainstorm. The royal court had designed the route of their charge to pass through the city, because this was the shortest distance and the shortest time. However, no one expected that this route would be so dangerous. The attack from the 2 sides needed to go around the city, so it was not direct enough to break through Su Qi's rain of crossbow arrows. Therefore, the real turning point of the battle was still the middle route, and it depended on whether the duo cavalry could rush out of the city gate. Only by rushing out of the city gate could there be a possibility of continuing the charge, and all the subsequent plans could be carried out. If they could not even rush out of the city gate, how could they talk about anything else? Behind the mountain of corpses that was dripping with blood at the city gate, the angry and violent curses of the nobles of the royal court could be vaguely heard, along with the merciless orders and hurried footsteps. No one knew how many people were rushing over, hoping to clear the mountain of corpses from the city gate in the shortest time possible, so as to make way for the cavalry behind. As for whether the iron hooks and ropes would hurt the bodies of the tribal warriors in the process, it was no longer within the grassland people's consideration. The desire to live had overwhelmed everything else. However, for the last warriors of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, today was destined to be a day of despair. The Tangs did not give them any chance, not even a chance to move the bodies of their compatriots. Inside and outside the city of Wei, there was suddenly a brief moment of silence. The sky that was dyed red by the rising sun suddenly revealed its original azure color. The wild flowers that were gently swayed by the wind on the field suddenly stopped moving, and the air that wrapped the fragile petals suddenly became countless times more viscous. The grassland warhorses in the city and the warhorses in the Tang camp outside the city all looked up at the sky at the same time, becoming a little anxious and restless, but too afraid to neigh to vent their emotions. The aura of heaven and earth was undergoing a drastic change. The heaven and earth that human eyes could see did not change at all. It was even more tranquil and beautiful than before. In the silence, suddenly there were countless hissing sounds, and then a horrible scene appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The mountain of corpses of the cavalrymen and warhorses in front of the city of Wei collapsed. He watched as his building collapsed. When the building collapsed, it must have disintegrated, starting from the eaves and beams of the building. The mountain of corpses also began to disintegrate from the inside. The tough leather armor and the strong body of the warhorse instantly disintegrated, turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The thin waterfall formed by the blood became much thicker, and then everything fell apart. In the middle of the mountain of corpses in front of the city of Wei, there was a huge gap, about 2 feet wide. Apart from blood and flesh soaking in the bloody water, there was nothing else in the wound. The streets of the city could be seen at a glance. People standing in the city could also clearly see the scenery outside the city. But at this moment, there was no one left standing in the city of Wei. The streets were filled with fallen yellow soil and accumulated dust. The wind was howling incessantly. The peasants and slaves who were carrying the bodies of the cavalrymen, and the hundreds of Duoer cavalry who were standing in the middle of the street ready to charge at the Tang camp, all disappeared. Just like the bodies of the cavalrymen in the gap of the mountain of corpses. These lives, which were still alive a moment ago, had now become formless chunks of flesh and blood. The street became the coldest and most terrifying shiraba in the Buddhism sect. There was nothing left except death. This was a tunnel of death. This was an arrow path. The arrow path extended from the south to the north of the city, breaking a mud wall in the north of the city. Dozens of carriages on the wall emitted clear light, protecting themselves. The corners of the carriages were damaged, revealing something pale inside, which looked like human bones. The national master looked to the south, his face pale. The people who were affected by the arrow path fled in all directions, bleeding, avoiding the second attack that did not happen. There were panicked shouts everywhere, only quieting down after a long time. The people hid behind the wheels, behind the uneasy horses, following the national master's gaze to the south. Their faces were full of fear, and their eyes were even showing signs of losing focus. At this moment, a straight Leng Ningyun slowly appeared in the sky above the streets of the city of Wei. Some people had already guessed who the person who shot the arrow was. Now that the famous Leng Ningyun appeared in front of them, their guesses were confirmed. In an instant, thousands of people died, half of them were Duoer cavalry who were ready to charge. This was not a massacre, but it was more terrifying. Facing such an unimaginable scene, facing an enemy beyond imagination, the grassland people could not even be angry, only fear and despair. Even the bravest man in the tribe lost all confidence at this moment. Scattered sounds of hooves came from the south gate of the city of Wei. The smoke and dust from the gap in the mountain of corpses gradually settled. A man walked in from there. An old horse was dragging an old cart behind him. The cart was filled to the brim with arrows. The man carried a quiver on his back and an iron bow on his shoulder. The man's clothes were mottled by the blood and dust that fell from the sky. He was wearing an ordinary Tang military uniform. He looked like an ordinary soldier of the Tang army. He was just an ordinary soldier of the Tang. Many years ago, he was a soldier in the city of Wei. After many years, he finally returned to the city. He was a wanderer who returned to his hometown at the border village. He was a veteran who dreamed of the Horn Battalion. He was covered with dust and unstoppable. I don't want to write words of reminiscence. Please vote for me. Thank you. Chapter 1092. The final battle between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe began on a spring morning. From the beginning to the end, Su Chi's central tent only paid the price of tens of thousands of crossbow bolts. They did not have to do anything else, and over 1,000 of the most elite Duoer cavalry died in the hands of one person. They died to that person's arrows. Chanyu rode on horseback and looked in the direction of the city of Wei behind him. He looked terrible. After the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, the unwritten rules in the cultivation world were all erased. Later, Lu Yiqing entered the palace alone and killed the emperor of the South Jin kingdom. This represented the emergence of a new world and new rules. With the spring wind and rain, the form of war began to undergo unimaginable drastic changes. The few powerhouses might not be able to decide the direction of the human world, but they were starting to have the right to decide the outcome of a war, such as the one in the city of Wei today. In the past, such a change was described by the dead Lu Yiqing, the domineering Hengmu Liren in Qinghe Prefecture, or Jun Mo in front of the verdant canyon. But it was not until Ning Ke appeared in the city of Wei that everyone, including Chanyu, realized that he was the only one who could represent the change of the form of war. Ning Ke was the one who could change the course of a battle to the greatest extent. It was because he had the ability, because he had the means, because he had the thoughts and the absolute will. Come to think of it, ever since he started cultivating, any changes he made to his cultivation methods and weapons could eventually be used on the battlefield. They could all be used to cause the greatest amount of damage. Even Yi Hongyu was not as good as him in this aspect. Perhaps it was because among the most powerful powerhouses in the cultivation world, he was the only one who started from the most common soldier. He was the only one who understood the battlefield the best. Therefore, he should be the one to change the war. In the field to the north of the city of Wei, the sound of retreat had already been heard. The sound of galloping horses could be heard everywhere. The remaining 8,000 Duoer cavalry were escorting Chanyu to the depths of the grassland. The Golden Tribe royal court still had many cavalrymen and seemed to be able to fight again. But the Duoer cavalry's morale had been severely damaged. They would never be able to enter the same rhythm again. That was a sure defeat. Chanyu's idea of gambling or risking his life was crushed before it could be implemented. He was defeated before the fight even started, which made him feel real despair. The crossbow battalion was not scary. Even if Su Qi used the crossbow battalion to seal the gate of the city of Wei, it would be meaningless. In fact, he purposely left this opportunity for the Tangs. He believed that his cavalrymen could withstand the terrifying rain of crossbows and turn the pain and death into courage bestowed by the Tengri heaven. He did not expect that the Duoer cavalry, who could defend against the rain of arrows, who could ignore death, would not be able to charge through that person's arrows. Their courage was numbed by the shock. That person seemed to be scarier than death. But so what if they left the city of Wei? According to the calculation of the high priest and the wise men, the Tang army would not give them too much time. The seemingly green and pleasant grassland, the incomparably familiar environment, could only become the graveyard of the palace's cavalrymen. Even if they returned to their hometown in the depths of the grassland, how many of them could survive? Chanyu looked at the road to the north with a pale face. He thought of the loyal warriors left in the city of Wei and the national master and high priests in the south. He felt an extreme pain in his chest. The Golden Tribe royal court was destroyed by Ning Ke's arrows before they could launch their final attack. Although it was hopeless to retreat, it was an inevitable choice. However, if they did not want to be chased by the Tang army, or to be harassed or even destroyed by Ning Ke's horrifying tactics, someone had to stop him. More than 2,000 elite cavalrymen were left inside and outside the city of Wei, ready to sacrifice their lives to slow down the pursuit of Su Qi's 6,000 cavalrymen. As for the cavalrymen in Kaiping and Chu City, they could only be wiped out one by one in despair. Naturally, the Golden Tribe royal court also left someone to stop Ning Quebec. There was no one else. It could not be anyone else. It could only be a Ning Ke walked on the streets of the city of Wei. His military boots stepped on the powdery organs and blood, making a pa-pa sound. Sometimes it felt like a young girl's bare feet stepping on a barrel of grape wine. He walked out of the southern part of the blood-soaked road and got closer to the flag of the Golden Tribe. He was about to take a step forward when he suddenly retracted his right foot and landed on the ground. He then looked to the side of the road. He alone had scared off the entire Golden Tribe royal court. Throughout history, such a thing had rarely happened. 1,000 years ago, the headmaster of the academy alone had scared off the entire West Hill Divine Palace. Of course he was more arrogant and powerful. But what Ning Ke had done was already very impressive. However, he could not scare off the person by the side of the road. A young man from the grassland was standing by the side of the road. The young man had been sitting in an abandoned restaurant by the side of the road for a whole night, waiting for Ning Kei's arrival. Because of this, he did not face the horrifying iron arrow directly. No one knew whether it was the young man's luck or the Duoer cavalry's misfortune. I can't stop that iron arrow, but it can't kill me either. The young man from the grassland looked at Ning Kei and said calmly, "And now you are too close to me. I can see your movements clearly. So it's even more impossible for you to kill me with an iron arrow. Let's try another way." Besides the iron bow, Ning Kei also had a cutlass on his shoulder, that heavy, dark and sharp iron cutlass. But it was obvious that he had no intention of pulling it out. He just looked at the young man quietly. He knew that the young man was a Da. He was the most powerful close combat powerhouse in the Golden Tribe royal court. He had long replaced General Lebu's position. It was said that he was the last disciple of the national master. But his real combat power might not be weaker than the national master. The young man might even be the most powerful human on the grassland. But just 2 years ago, he was just a poor slave. He was thin, bullied and could die at any time. What changed everything was that spring breeze that turned into light rain. Ning Kei subconsciously looked up at the blue sky and then shook his head. According to his usual temperament, he had no interest in talking to this young powerhouse called a Da. Just like what Yi Hongyu once said, since they were going to fight, why talk so much nonsense? In the end, it all depended on who would die and who would live. But because of that spring breeze and rain, he was suddenly curious about this young man. "Who named you?" Ning Kei asked. Ada said, "I named it myself." Ning Kei asked, "Why did you name yourself?" In the words of you people from the Central Plains, Ada means very good at fighting. Ning Kei smiled and said, "I have stayed here for many years. My grassland barbarian language is better than yours. I know that Ada means cheap. Da means bone. You are a cheap bone." Hearing this, Ada's face turned gloomy. "The national master asked you to stay and stop me, which means he asked you to die." Ning Kei ignored his expression and said, "Get out of my way. For her sake, I will leave your body intact." Ada didn't know who he was talking about. He just felt angry. Because obviously, Mr. 13 of the academy did not see him as a real opponent. Why? He had always thought that he respected the academy. Yes, he had always wanted to kill his way to Chang'an and kill all those strange people in the back of the mountain of the academy. But he thought it represented his respect. Why did Ning Kei have such an attitude? "I admit that you are powerful." Ada looked at the blood-stained long street and the iron bow on Ning Kei's shoulder. He sneered and said, "But you don't know how powerful I am. What right do you have to look down on me when you can't use the iron arrow?" He was angry, but he was smiling. He wanted to express his contempt in this way. No matter how high Ning Kei's state of cultivation was, he was only at the upper state of knowing destiny. Now that the primordial 13 arrows had lost their greatest power, he did not think that his opponent was his opponent. The task given to him by Chanyu and the national master was to stop Ning Kei, slow him down when he passed the city of Wei, and then wait for a chance to leave. He agreed in silence, but he was thinking about something else. He was the gift from Tingri to the grassland. He was the only embodiment of the vast and mighty will. How could he lose to a human like Ning Kei? He wanted to defeat him fair and square. Ning Kei had stopped smiling. He looked at him quietly and said, "Then you shall die." Ada squinted his eyes and a cruel expression appeared on his young and dark face. He took a deep breath, and his chest rose like a mountain rising from the grassland. In just a breath, half of the air on the streets of the city of Wei was inhaled into his body. At the same time, there seemed to be endless qi of heaven and earth pouring into his body. His physique was completely changed by the spring wind and rain. He was very close to the qi of heaven and earth on the grassland. He could breathe in the qi of heaven and earth at a speed that other cultivators could not imagine. What did it mean? It meant that he had an inexhaustible power. After he became the national master's disciple, he even learned the cultivation method of the Enlightenment doctrine. The national master was knowledgeable and well-versed in 3 arts. Besides, he was a good friend of Xiong Chumo, so it was not surprising that he had such a method. In other words, Ada had been possessed by the devil. His body was harder than a real stone, and his life was more tenacious than a real stone. With the blessing of Tingri, he felt that he should be invincible. Yes, he was afraid of Ning Kei's iron arrow. But after seeing the iron arrow today, he still felt that he could try to take it head-on. It was not hard to imagine his strong confidence. As Ada breathed, the qi of heaven and earth was in chaos. A gust of wind blew in the city of Wei. He looked at Ning Kei as if he was looking at a dead man. He wanted to do what Chanyu and the national master did not expect him to do. He wanted to save the fate of the royal court. He wanted to be the new sun on the grassland and shine on the entire human world. That was why he had remained silent in this war, watching everything happen quietly. Only now did he walk onto the street and block Ning Kei's path, ready to kill him. Everyone inside and outside of the city of Wei felt the drastic change of the qi of heaven and earth. Ordinary people could not see the change of the qi of heaven and earth, but they could see the strange phenomenon. A dark cloud suddenly floated over the city of Wei and blocked all the sunlight. Powerhouses like the National Master and Su Qi could clearly sense that the qi of heaven and earth was rushing toward somewhere. The horrifying power that Ada displayed made the two of them have completely different feelings. The wind blew on the street. The remaining half of the signboard of the tavern was blown to the mud wall, making a muffled sound. The yellow soil on the wall was peeled off. At this moment, Ning Kei suddenly said something. "You know what? I used to buy many jars of wine and roasted chicken in this tavern. I won a lot of money, took a lot of people's underwear and rejected many marriage offers. Take a break. Tomorrow I will beat Ada to death." Ada. This name came from a police story. I wish everyone a happy weekend and a successful blind date. Don't talk about marriage with Sang Sang. Chapter 1093. Ning Kei looked at the street. The buildings on both sides of the street were still the same as when he was here years ago. They were all made of yellow soil. After being blown by the wind for a long time, they became soft and turned into yellow sand. Back then, he was playing lewd dangling fist with someone in the inn. Sang Sang was the judge. The master and the servant won money together. Then they walked out of the inn. He walked with his hands behind his back while Sang Sang followed behind him with the wine pot and roasted chicken. It was very strenuous. At that time, they were stepping on the yellow sand. After so many years, the inn was ruined, the old friends were gone, and the yellow sand had turned into blood. What Ning Kei was stepping on now was the blood of his enemies, but also the blood of many old friends. It was inevitable that he missed it. At this moment, it was not the time to reminisce about the past. No matter who saw it, the timing of this sentence was very inexplicable. It was very incongruous with the current atmosphere of the battle. As a result, Ada's face became extremely gloomy. He felt that Ning Kei was humiliating him on purpose. He calmed himself down and breathed out the foul air. He stepped on the Taoist stone and struck forward with a punch. It was a very simple move. It could not even be considered as a move. However, in the simplicity, there was extreme power. Therefore, the speed was also extremely fast. A light explosion was heard on the street. That was the result of the air being squeezed away rapidly. Ada's fist was like an arrow, hitting in front of Ning Quebec. Just like what he said, he was very good at fighting. Such a simple punch was so majestic, with the unique roughness of the grassland. It actually had the feeling of Liu Bai's great river sword. If it were any other cultivator, they would probably choose to retreat when faced with such a fist, because the weakest part of a cultivator was their body. To fight against an enemy who cultivated the methods of the Enlightenment doctrine, absorbed the world into his body, and possessed immense strength, the first thing he had to do was to put some distance between himself and his opponent. But Ning Kai did not retreat. Ada knew that Ning Kai would not retreat. He knew that Ning Kai had already joined the devil and his body was equally strong. Ning Kai had enough strength, no matter the strength or the strength of his body, to take this punch head-on. That was the moment that Ada was waiting for. He wanted to create an environment where he could fight head-on. Because he had countless backup plans and countless tough means, he needed a receiving surface to provide support. Just like those terrifying sandstorms in the grasslands at the turn of spring and summer, they weren't that scary when passing through the open plains. As long as one maintained a distance, one could even view those scenes as rare and beautiful scenery. However, when someone or something was in the middle of those sandstorms and began to bear the power of the sandstorms, they would instantly be riddled with holes and broken beyond repair. Ada's fist and his cultivation method was the sandstorm. As long as Ning Kai did not retreat, as long as Ning Kai took it head-on, the sandstorm would devour him. However, to his surprise, Ning Kai did not choose to dodge or retreat, nor did he use the devil's doctrine's methods to block it. From the front, it seemed that he did not do anything. There was no expression on Ning Kai's face. The iron bow was still on his shoulder and the iron cutlass was still on his back. He even had his hands behind his back. It seemed that he did not care about the fist that was about to hit him. No one could really ignore it. That fist belonged to Ada, carrying the divine power left by Haotian on the grassland. In fact, Ning Kai had already made his own response, but Ada did not see it. His hands that were behind his back were spread out. His right hand quickly wrote a word in the air. When he finished writing the word, his face turned pale. At the same time, an unimaginably vigorous psyche power was emitted from his body and spread to the heaven and earth. The chi of heaven and earth in the city of Wei was pouring into Ada's body. All of a sudden, it became stagnant. After a moment, the chi of heaven and earth seemed to have heard some order and began to condense into a shape. The violent sandstorm passed through the street and blurred everyone's sight. Ning Kai wrote a word. That word was a talisman. The sandstorm did come. But it was not caused by Ada. It was caused by him. Countless yellow sand flew up from the ground, the walls, and the tables and chairs that no one cared about in the inn. It came to the street at an unimaginable speed and came to the front of Ada's fist. A wisp of yellow sand was a tie. There was an amazing amount of chi of heaven and earth in it. Hundreds of wisps of yellow sand rose from the streets and buildings of the city of Wei. Following Ning Kai's order, they fell on Ada's fist and became a tie. It was as if his fist was wrapped with countless layers of gauze. Old, pus-stained, yellow gauze. Ning Kai used the bind talisman. The yellow sand in the city of Wei was his talisman. Ada instantly felt that his fist had smashed into a piece of desert. The desert was bottomless and there was a faint flow under it. The horrifying force was tearing his hand. He was not afraid of the tearing pain. Instead, he became more clear-headed. He growled and loosened his fist. His 5 fingers were like 5 machetes. With the unparalleled strength, he directly cut through the countless layers of yellow sand on his fist. Ning Kai looked at the yellow sand gradually breaking. He raised his right hand and wrote several strokes. Obviously, his word was very simple. Ada's first punch had ended. He forcibly broke free from the bind talisman and regained his freedom. The first thing he did was to take a heavy step forward. He stepped on the ground. With the power of heaven and earth, he raised his fist again. It was still a simple punch. It was aimed at Ning Kei's face. What he pursued was very simple. What he wanted was also very simple. He did not expect that this punch could defeat Ning Quebec. He did not even think that it could hurt Ning Quebec. He only hoped that Ning Kei could take it. As long as Ning Kei chose to take it, he would have a way. Ning Kei still did not take it. What took the second punch from Ada was the second talisman he wrote. When he wrote this talisman, he was not looking at Ada's fist, but the streets of the city of Wei. The city of Wei was a military stronghold. It was a real small city. It could only accommodate a few people. There were not many buildings either. There were only 4 main streets, 2 in both horizontal and vertical directions. If one looked down from the sky, the main street of the city of Wei formed a character. Jing, it was a coincidence. The most powerful talisman of Master Yen Sei was the Jing talisman. The first talisman that Ning Kei learned was also the Jing talisman. It was also a coincidence. Ning Kei looked at the streets of the city of Wei and wrote the very simple Jing talisman. This talisman had once cut the space on the nameless mountain in the north of Chang'an. It turned the infinite light summoned by Elder Wei Guangming into fragments in the mirror. It could be imagined how powerful this Jing talisman was. Ada's soul was cleansed by the spring rain. He was extremely sensitive to the changes of the qi of heaven and earth. Although he did not know talisman Taoism, he instantly felt the changes of the heaven and earth. His face changed dramatically. Facing such a horrible and sharp talisman, he did not dare to continue punching. A roar resounded through the street. He took a step back with great difficulty. He crushed the street in front of the tavern and returned all the accumulated strength to the earth. Only then he could take back his fists and cover his face with them. Ning Kei today might be slightly different from his master Yen Sei in the understanding of talisman Taoism. But when it came to the depth of cultivation of talisman Taoism, they had already reached the same place. Even a powerhouse like Wei Guangming had to surpass the 5 states to block this Jing talisman. Although Ada's cultivation state of Devil's Doctrine was equal to the peak of the 5 states, he could only seek for self-preservation. Self-preservation, he could only use his own body to protect his life. At this moment in the city of Wei, nothing was more trustworthy and more powerful than his own body. The wind was blowing wildly on the long street. Yellow sand filled the sky. Ada's figure was about to be swallowed up. It seemed that he would fall at any time. But he did not fall. His fists actually blocked most of the talisman. No wonder he was the gift from Haotian to the grassland. His body strength had indeed exceeded the scope of ordinary powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine. After a long time, the talisman and the infinite qi of heaven and earth summoned by the Jing talisman finally dissipated in the heaven and earth. The yellow sand gradually fell and the wind was gone. Ada slowly loosened his fists and looked at Ning Kei again. His body was covered with terrifying wounds, and countless amounts of blood flowed out like a waterfall. His 2 toughest fists were already bony, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. The most important thing was that the bone necklace hanging around his neck had already turned into powder. His proudest and most confident body was broken. His last life-saving item had already been blown away by the wind. But he was still alive. As long as he was alive, he could win. I thought you had already lost the courage to fight and the ability to kill after being imprisoned in Chang'an for so many years. I never thought that you still have so many skills. It seems that I have underestimated the academy after all. Ada stared at Ning Quebec. The childishness on his face had already been smeared by the blood. His eyes were emitting cold light like a wolf and endless killing intent. Unfortunately, you still can't kill me. Although I don't know how you saw through my cultivation method and refused to take my fists, but I want to know more. Such a powerful talisman couldn't kill me. Besides taking my fists, what else can you do? Ada looked very miserable at this moment. But his tone was like a real winner. He looked at Ning Kai without hiding his killing intent and contempt, as if he was looking at an old beast that was about to die. Ning Kai looked at him calmly and said, I can still kill you. Ada grinned with a cruel smile and said, this human world might have belonged to you people before, but it will belong to us in the end. Because we are younger. After saying this, he raised his fist again. His fist was bleeding. Under the gloomy clouds, the ghastly white bones looked especially terrifying. He gathered all his strength into this fist. Ning Kai stretched out his right hand and wrote another character on the street of the city of Wei. This character was even simpler than the character of Jing. It only had half of the strokes. Half of the character of Jing could only be 2. He wrote a talisman of 2. 2 unimaginably powerful talisman intents suddenly shrouded the entire city of Wei. It even spread outside the city of Wei. The remaining half of the signboard of the tavern suddenly swung to the middle of the street and hung in the air, looking like a knife. A hole suddenly appeared in the wall of a small courtyard. A hunting knife that had been hidden for many years stretched out half of its body from the hole, as if it wanted to see this strange world again. Those grassland cavalries that were retreating outside the city of Wei suddenly found that their cutlasses started to collide in the sheath and wanted to leave. And the Tang army that was preparing to chase found that they wanted to draw out their swords to kill the enemy. The 2 talisman intents were both knife intents. Ada's face turned extremely ugly because he smelled the scent of death. He never thought that Ning Kai had more powerful means, and he never thought that he couldn't even tell whether it was talisman intents or knife intents. He let out an angry and unwilling roar and was forced to withdraw his fist again. He burst out the chi of heaven and earth stored in his body and retreated to the back of the street, hoping to get out of the range of the 2 talisman intents. However, Ning Kai's 2 talisman had already shrouded the entire city of Wei. How could he escape? The strong wind blew again. Ada let out a painful and frustrated cry. His clothes were torn into pieces, and then his skin started to tear. The blood that had just stopped gushing out of his body again. He stopped retreating and covered his face with his fists, struggling to hold on in the strong wind. Finally, Ning Kai moved and rushed forward. Outside the city of Wei, the national master looked at the black wind that rolled like a dragon under the gloomy clouds. He looked at the sand there and sensed the sharp talisman intents there. His expression didn't change, but his eyes revealed deep worry and vigilance. Looking at the strange sky, those grassland cavalries looked even more terrible. Suddenly, people heard a thunder in the city of Wei, and then there were countless thunders. The national master withdrew his gaze and sat back in the carriage. The wind calmed down and the sand fell. The black cloud also disappeared. The sunlight fell on the streets and buildings of the city of Wei again. The blue sky returned to people's sight. It was peaceful and pleasant. There was a pit on the straightest and longest street in the city of Wei. Ada was lying at the bottom of the pit, covered with blood and bones sticking out of his body. He was dying and looked extremely miserable. If it wasn't for Haotian's blessing, he would have died long ago. Ning Kai slowly straightened his body. His chest rose and fell slightly, his right hand trembled slightly, and his face was slightly pale. But his expression was as calm as before, as if he didn't throw out 300 punches in a few seconds. The continuous thunder that everyone outside the city heard was the sound of his punches landing on Ada's body. His face was a little pale. It had nothing to do with the consumption of energy, but because he had written 3 divine talismans in a row. Even with his extremely vigorous psyche power, he still felt a little tired. Ada coughed painfully. Blood spilled out from the corner of his mouth. He turned his head with difficulty and looked at Ning Quebec. His eyes were full of confusion and fear. Maybe it was to cover up this emotion, it turned into some kind of contempt at last. He was very unwilling because he still had many tricks that he hadn't used. So he used his eyes to mock Ning Quebec. In the end, you still don't dare to take my punches. Ning Ke didn't say anything. It was not that he didn't dare to take the punches of this grassland lad, but he didn't need to. He didn't care to take it. Just like now, it was not that he couldn't explain, but he didn't want to. What he wanted to explain was another matter. You said you were good at fighting, so I beat you to death. He looked at Ada, who was about to die, and said, I know it's cruel, but you barbarians don't have the word cruel. So it doesn't matter. I just want your people who are still alive to be more afraid. Yes, many people were scared at this moment, so scared that they were trembling all over. The grassland cavalries outside the city were trembling and whipping their horses with all their might. They wanted to escape as fast and as far as possible. Even the well-disciplined Duoer cavalry formation was a little messed up. The grassland cavalries in the city were trembling and didn't dare to move. The thunder-like sound of punches landing on bodies in the sandstorm had already made them let go of the reins and cover their ears in fear. No one would have thought that the battle would end like this. In the hearts of the grassland cavalries, Ada was a gift from the immortal heaven to the grassland. He was an undefeated warrior. How could he be beaten like a dog by the Tang army? The national master and Chanyu were clear about the power of the academy. They didn't think that Ada could defeat Ning Ke, but they thought that he could hold his opponent for a while and even find a chance to escape. Who would have thought that Ning Ke could win so easily and naturally? Ada himself had said before that Ning Ke's iron arrow had lost its greatest power. So what else could he do? He was indeed very strong, but he had forgotten one very important thing. He only remembered that Ning Ke's iron arrow could shock the world, and he only remembered that Ning Ke joined the devil. But he forgot that after Ning Ke started cultivation, he didn't cultivate sword, devil or psyche power, but talisman. Ning Ke's real identity had always been a talisman master. He was now a divine talisman master. Since the right to light in the Peach Mountain, he hadn't used talisman for a long time, so many people had forgotten his identity. But he was a divine talisman master, one of the 2 most powerful divine talisman masters in the world after Yen Sei and the master of calligrapher. A talisman master was invincible in the same state. A divine talisman master could be invincible under the 5 states. Unless he met a real genius like Liu Bai, Jun Mo, and Yi Su who didn't follow the normal rules. A real genius had nothing to do with heaven. Talent was not given by heaven, but obtained by oneself through hard cultivation, peerless talent and supreme willpower. Once it was obtained, it couldn't be lost. Ada's cultivation talent and everything he had were given by Haotian. So he wasn't a real genius. Then as long as he was still within the 5 states, even if he had mastered the devil's doctrine's art in just 1 year and reached the peak of the 5 states according to the standard of the cultivation world, he still couldn't be a match for a divine talisman master. Ada didn't know if he finally understood something before he died. His eyes quickly dimmed. There was unwillingness, sadness, anger and despair in the depth of the dimness. Because in this battle, the gap between him and Ning Ke was too big, so big that it couldn't be narrowed. It was so big that it made him feel hopeless. Even if he had to fight again, he couldn't see any possibility of winning. Why? The final radiance of the setting sun before his death allowed him to speak. He blankly looked at the blue sky and murmured, "Why? Why?" At the last moment, the problem that still troubled this grassland lad and made his soul unable to rest had nothing to do with the state of cultivation. It was only related to faith. Ada was very proud and confident because he firmly believed that he was a gift from Haotian to the grassland. He firmly believed that his strength had its own reasons and he would never fail. Wouldn't his failure mean the failure of Haotian? This was something that could not possibly happen. However, in front of this man, this matter just happened as it should. What was going on? "This is my city." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "I left Chang'an, but this is still my city. No one can defeat me in Chang'an, and no one can defeat me here." Ada shook his head painfully and said while gasping, "But Tingri, it said that you and Hengmu are her gifts to the human world. Although she has always been in charge of the money at home, she didn't ask for my permission before she gave you these gifts." Ning Ke was silent for a moment and then said, "Since she is not here now, I think it's reasonable for me to take back these gifts." I think she would be too embarrassed to object. It was not until now that Ada realized who was the she that Ning Ke said before the battle that he would leave his body intact for the sake of her. His eyes became extremely confused, and then he started to cry silently in despair and pain. In the end, he closed his eyes and couldn't see the sky anymore. "From now on, I will keep killing people at night. Please cast your monthly votes to help me kill. Thank you." Chapter 1094. Ada died. No matter whether he accepted the fact or not, he closed his eyes and left the world. It had been exactly 1 year since he became a powerhouse of the royal court from a slave. He was a young man from the grassland. He had a firm belief and a true love for his tribe. It was indeed cruel to destroy his belief before he died. Ning Ke was a cruel man. Ning Ke had always been a cruel person. He knew how cruel and bloodthirsty this grassland lad was when he killed the Tangs. But he was not a perverted person who would destroy his enemy's faith before his death to gain some kind of pleasure. He inherited Lotus Mantle, but he was not Lotus. The reason why he said those words to Ada at the last moment was that he always insisted on a principle: a man could live a muddled life, but he should die sober. He asked himself that, so he treated others the same way. And the time he said those words was also the time for him to adjust his chi circulation. Since he was free, he should do something meaningful. When Ada closed his eyes, he had finished adjusting his chi circulation. The raging waves in his sense of perception had calmed down. The crystal bead condensed by the Great Spirit in his lower abdomen was shining brightly. Everything was in order. He looked at the grassland in the north outside of the city of Wei. He bent his knees slightly, and the bluestone under his feet cracked inch by inch. An unimaginable power passed from his knees to the ground and back again. With a loud bang, he left the street and jumped to the blue sky. It was like jumping to the blue sea. He jumped very high and broke through the cool air. In an instant, he was far away from the ground and was more than 1,000 feet high in the sky. Looking down from here, the city of Wei had become an inconspicuous mound and the wilderness seemed to have become a big carpet. The flag of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could be seen faintly in the distance. But he did not know if Chan Yu was there. On the wilderness, hundreds of clouds of dust were getting thicker and thicker. Each cloud of dust represented a grassland person who was running for their lives. They were running for their lives because they wanted to survive. Because he was high, he could see very far. He looked around, trying to see something, until the Tianqi Mountains became a black line in his sight. But he still did not see the person he wanted to see. He was not the headmaster of the academy and could not truly fly freely. No matter how high he jumped, there would always be a moment when he would fall. However, he could choose the timing and direction of his fall. The next moment, he landed on the surface of the wilderness. His speed became faster and faster. The wind blew against his Tang uniform, making a crackling sound like an explosion. But he did not even squint his eyes. He had to stare at the place where he landed. As he got closer and closer to the ground, he could see the cavalry and carriages galloping across the plains clearly. He could even see the terrified expressions on the cavalry's faces and the wooden boxes on the carriages. Those carriages were his targets. The national master of the Golden Tribe royal court was in that carriage. As for Chanyu and the last cavalryman of the Golden Tribe royal court who had fled dozens of miles to the north, he did not care. What he needed to do now was to kill that mysterious and powerful imperial tutor. There was a deafening sound of air tearing in the sky above the wilderness. A person's figure fell from the blue sky like a meteorite. Behind him, there was a faint flame caused by the friction. However, because he fell too fast, he was completely left behind. The grassland warhorses were terrified and kept neighing. They ignored the whipping of their masters and spun around on the spot. The carriages stopped where they were. No matter how hard the drivers shouted, they could not move forward. There was a loud bang. One of the carriages was smashed and turned into dust. The carriages turned into countless splinters of wood that were as thick as fingers and shot out in all directions. The horses and cavalrymen who were unable to escape immediately had many wounds on their bodies. Miserable cries rang out incessantly, and the scene was extremely bloody. The dust gradually settled and Ning Kei's figure appeared in front of everyone. He looked at the national master in front of him and said, "It seems that you have long guessed that I would come." The national master of the Golden Tribe sat cross-legged on the ground in front of him. His old face looked calm. Ning Kei jumped down from the sky and crushed the entire carriage with one foot, but he did not kill him. Just when his foot crushed the carriage and came to the top of the national master's head, the national master suddenly disappeared from where he was and came to the other side of the carriage. When the entire carriage was destroyed, the national master sat on the plains. There were weeds and wildflowers everywhere on the plains and they surrounded him. The national master did not pick any wildflowers. He just looked at one in front of him and said calmly, "I have been waiting for someone from the academy to jump down from the sky. I just did not expect that it would be you." Ning Kei looked around and looked at the seemingly scattered carriages. He felt a mysterious and strange aura gradually becoming stronger. The aura was filled with the primitive smell of blood. "This is what you've been preparing for?" He looked back at the national master in front of him and said, "You should be very clear that no tactical array can hurt me, no matter how strong it is." The wrinkles on the national master's face relaxed at the same time. He looked at Ning Kei and said expressionlessly, "You have mastered the Great Spirit and your body is as hard as gold and stone." But this does not mean that you are really invulnerable. After saying this, his figure suddenly appeared more than 10 feet away and stood on another carriage. The wind on the grassland blew on his coarse clothes and the ordinary wooden bead chain swayed gently. He looked at Ning Kei and said calmly, "The academy is indeed extraordinary. I thought I had valued you enough, but I did not expect that I still underestimated you. I thought that you would at most be at the peak of knowing destiny state after leaving Chang'an. I did not expect that you could defeat Ada so easily. But I still want to try to trap you. If I can trap you, I will have the chance to kill you." The national master did not say this, but Ning Kei understood what he meant. He looked at him and thought of the 2 times that the national master showed ghost-like movements. He slightly raised his eyebrows. He had a weird feeling because it did not make sense. Even the most powerful cultivators, such as the Abbey Dean and the eldest brother, who were in the distanceless state, could not come and go as fast as lightning in such a small area. He looked around and looked at the carriages scattered in the field. He felt the primitive and barbaric smell of blood and the gradually materialized array intent. He roughly grasped something. This was the preparation of the national master of the Golden Tribe. He used himself as bait to lure the enemy into the array. His original position was the array eye, but he had the ability to leave and trap the enemy. It was a simple method, but it was very difficult to realize. Because he had to be able to get rid of the enemy, especially when the enemy was a cultivator at the level of Yu Lien or Ning Quebec. The ability to get rid of the enemy was even vaguely connected with the distanceless state to a certain extent. The national master stood on the carriage in the distance with his eyes closed. He put his palms together and kept chanting something silently. It was neither the Buddhist scriptures nor the Taoist canon. Listening to the weird sounds, it was more like the witchcraft prayers commonly used by the grassland priests. The chi of heaven and earth on the grassland changed dramatically. Countless gusts of wind blew from all directions and stopped outside the caravan. They began to roll up continuously, sucking the air in the caravan and throwing it into the sky. In an instant, the air around Ning Ke became extremely thin, and the warm and pleasant feeling brought by the morning breeze and morning light disappeared. In the next moment, Ning Ke smelled a strong smell of blood. The air around him suddenly became extremely cold. The smell of blood and coldness even invaded his body and reached the depths of his sense of perception, snow mountain and ocean of chi. His psyche power was a little stagnant, and the spinning speed of the crystal-clear water droplets condensed from the Great Spirit in his lower abdomen was forced to slow down. What was even more shocking was that the snow mountain was covered with an extremely thick layer of new snow. The dark clouds came to the sky above the grassland again, covering the warm sun. Ning Ke slightly lowered his head and did not sit down. He silently resisted the powerful array intent and thought about how to break it. He did not try to walk out because there was no path in front of him. In the cold big array, the surface of his body was quickly covered with a layer of frost. His eyebrows were covered with 2 streaks of white snow, which looked a little funny and a little scary. He did not think of a way to break the array because he could not determine where the national master was in the array. The national master was indeed the strongest person in the grassland. His state was unfathomable. He was obviously not a master of array, but he had used a very strange method in the Central Plains cultivation world to build such a big array with carriages in the wilderness and trap him. The national master finished the scripture or incantation that no one could understand. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Ning Ke calmly. He said, "There are boxes in the carriages. There are bones in the boxes. They are all the bones of the Tangs. Chanyu collected them for me for several years. Maybe some of them belong to the garrison of the city of Wei." Ning Ke raised his head and stared at him. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. The national master did not seem to notice the hidden meaning in his eyes. He continued, "I know you used to live in the city of Wei. You must have an old relationship with some of the bones in the box. Unfortunately, they are already dead. The remaining souls are only resentment and no old relationship with you. They still want to be a part of my power to kill you." This was the foundation of the blood sacrifice array. The national master was well versed in 3 ways. He had a high state and profound knowledge. He gathered the power of faith with Buddhism, collected souls with witchcraft, and used Taoism to build this big array with the power of heaven and earth. For this, he did not hesitate to sacrifice his lifespan. Because only such a blood sacrifice formation would be able to accomplish his goal. The Great Spirit in Ning Ke's body had been gradually frozen. The smell of blood had even made his sense of perception a little shaken and uneasy. However, his mind was still clear. He stared at the national master and said, "Why are you telling me this?" When he said this, the frost on his eyebrows had already grown to about a foot. "Because what you said before Ada died was very reasonable." The national master looked at him and said with pity, "People can live muddle-headed, but they should die with a clear mind." "Very good," Ning Kai said. The national master asked, "What's very good?" Ning Kai looked at him and said, "I have already planned to exterminate the Golden Tribe royal court. No matter who comes to persuade me, I will not change my mind. I don't need anything to help me to make up my mind. But what you have done can give me more powerful excuses when eldest brother questions me in the future." The national master understood what he meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "Everything is an excuse." Ning Kai looked at the horse carriage under his feet. He looked at the slightly damaged box on the carriage. He looked at the faintly visible white bones in the box. Finally, he slowly took a step forward. "So tired. My neck. I haven't had it for a long time. I want to resume swimming." You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.